today. Yes, you actually read that correctly. Starmer is gagging or whipping Labour MPs into voting against a full public inquiry. What has this man got to hide? Guys, if you're watching this live, get involved in the live chat. Let me know your thoughts on it. The question is, has Starmer got something to hide? Yes or no? If you're watching on a replay, again, let us know in the comments. And if you haven't already, please do hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and let's get into it. Well, it's been a very, very busy few days with regard to this situation. And again, more pressure is coming the way of Keir Starmer and this Labour government in doing a full inquiry into the rape gang scandal. Look, the situation is that Labour don't want to do it. They don't want to do a full public inquiry, and it looks like that's being headed up by Keir Starmer himself. And as stated, guys, Kemi Badenoch is trying to push this forward, and there might be a forced into a vote today. Prime Minister's Questions is going to be starting in around 2 hours' time, so we're going to be seeing all of it happen and seeing what actually happens if this vote goes ahead. But let me tell you the full story on what we've got with regards to Starmer whipping his Labour MPs to voting against should this public inquiry vote actually happen. Yes, this is 2025, and Starmer is a disgraceful leader. Why is he doing this? What has he got to hide? Well, as I said, let's go through it. So, what's being said today, guys, is that Keir Starmer will today order his Labour MPs to vote against calls for a new national inquiry into the Asian rape grooming gang scandal, insisting the time has passed to ask any more questions. However, the Prime Minister was accused of moral cowardice by the Conservatives after the Minister rejected a request from Labour-run Oldham Council for a fresh investigation. Tory leader Kemi Badenoch today plans to table an amendment in the Commons to the government's Children Wellbeings and Schools Bill. It will call for a specific investigation into failings and cover-ups in about 60 northern towns over Pakistani heritage rape gangs. Keir Starmer also faces pressure from Reform UK Nigel Farage, as yesterday he threatened to crowdfund his own private inquiry. Number 10 insisted that if selected by the Speaker and successful, the Tory motion would in fact torpedo Labour's flagship schools legalisation. As a result, the PM is prepared to use his huge majority with a 3-line whip, ordering Labour MPs to vote against it. Keir has insisted that the 2022 independent inquiry into child sexual abuse, which took 7 years to complete, was thorough enough to identify any failings and take action. His spokesman said the time has passed for more inquiries and consultations, especially for victims and survivors who clearly want action. Yet campaigners, as said, insist the previous inquiry led by Proof Alexis J only skimmed the surface of organised abuses by men of largely Pakistani heritage. So as stated, guys, again, today is going to be a very, very interesting one in terms of Prime Minister's Questions. But as you can see, troops, this is diabolical. I can't actually believe what we're reading with actually on this situation, that they're whipping him into it. Why doesn't he want a full public inquiry? There are so many people that are needing answers. There's so many. Apparently, not even scratched the surface of how deep this scandal actually is. And these previous inquiries, as stated, have only scratched the surface. So again, I was watching Jordan Peterson and Piers Morgan earlier on today, and the estimated amount, it could vary from 10,000 to 1 million people that were abused by these gangs and these gangs. So why can't a full public inquiry be happening? Why is everybody kind of uniting, whether that be Reform, Conservatives, neutrals in the situation, but Labour are the only ones that don't want a full public inquiry? And I will say Labour, in fact, again, we're starting to see, due to this headline, that of course it is only Keir Starmer. Keir Starmer's the one whipping his MPs. He's forcing his MPs into voting against it and staying silent on the matter. So I can imagine that the majority of the Labour MPs actually within his own party would actually want a full public inquiry. I'm sure of it, because not all of those, there's hundreds of Labour MPs in there, obviously take the majority of the seats, I'm sure there would be a lot of them that actually going, no, I do want to see a full public inquiry. So that's probably why Starmer's whipping them into voting against. They could also lose their job if they do go against it. So again, this is absolutely mental, and I'm certainly looking forward to Prime Minister's questions. That's going to be starting in around 2 hours. We'll be here for the sort of fallout from it. I think Kemi Badenoch, again, whether you like her or not, she is pushing for this inquiry, this full public inquiry, and we'll go hard on him today. So I want to see him. Again, he won't answer any questions. We know what he's like. But I can imagine the whole of Prime Minister's questions is just going to be about this whole scandal and why they're refusing every single twist and turn to go against the full public inquiry, despite everybody else that Starmer dubs as the far right, yet the whole of the world that aren't Labour supporters, by the way, far right, into wanting a full public inquiry, because there's so much that has not yet been released. There's so much more work to be done with this scandal, and there's still justice to be found for the victims. And this is a problem, and Keir Starmer still continuing to hide it. And again, if he has nothing to hide, if Elon Musk isn't right, which I do believe Elon Musk is absolutely correct. I don't think Elon Musk would come onto social media and speak about this publicly if there was no, or he had no proof, or he had no suspicion. I don't think he's the sort of guy that just chucks out words and leaves it. He's doubled down, tripled down, quadrupled down on Keir Starmer being a part of this cover-up. So why? He's super guilty. Why does he not just allow it? Why is he stopping his own members of parliament from voting for a public inquiry? There's something seriously fishy. Because if I had nothing to play a part and I was squeaky clean, I would say, go ahead, do it, go for it, do the full public inquiry. But it just screams of absolute guilt because he's the only person that doesn't want it. And he's trying to gaslight everybody else who wants to see it. Little does he know, it's pretty much the majority of the country that wants to see it happen. So, yeah. What an arsehole. But guys, do let me know your thoughts in there. Lots of comments, guys. Thank you for tuning in. Hope you're all well. Take some comments in here. Pushing for a new national inquiry into the grooming gangs by halting the progress of the bill aimed at bolstering children safely is utterly sickening. It's only a job. Nothing will happen. It never does. Inquiry, whatever. AW88 says get Labour out. I mean, I did a poll, by the way. I said, is Keir Starmer hiding something? And 96% of you said yes. 4% of you said no. And there's been a lot of votes on this poll. So a lot of people obviously thinking that there is something there. But we're going to be there in 2 hours' time, guys. Ready for Prime Minister's questions to see. But as stated, if this vote or this vote goes ahead due to Kemi Badenoch pushing this sort of thing through, then Labour MPs have been gagged and whipped into voting against it, or could lose their jobs. Yes, you heard it right. Mental. Guys, let me know your thoughts on this one down there in the comments. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and I will be back later. In fact, we've got a super chat. Big shout out to English Who Dat. Donates $25. What an absolute hero, bro. Thank you so much for donating. What a guy, or woman for that matter. But thank you so much for donating $25 of your hard-earned money. What an absolute legend. That will go back into investment into the channel, of course, as we keep trying to...
Let's talk to Harry Phibbs, columnist at Conservative Home. Harry, very good morning to you.
Morning.
Thank you very much indeed for joining us. A very happy new year to you. Not such a happy new year for Keir Starmer, who's returned from his holiday in Madeira to yet more brickbat criticism, not only from the people of Great Britain and not only from the Tories and Reform, but now from Elon Musk as well.
Yes, it's as we've discussed before, it's astonishing how quickly this has happened, isn't it? That we've only had him for 6 months, and I don't see any turnaround for him, and I don't see. It's not as if he's taking measures that are going to be short-term unpopular and then have benefits in the long run.
No,
I think it's just going to can't get any worse.
Well, this is it. I mean, we still hear occasionally from people who try to kind of justify what he's doing inside the Labour Party by saying, oh, well, you know, they have to front load the disappointment. They have to make sure that all the bad stuff happens in the first half of their sort of tenancy of Downing Street, because people will forget all about it by the time there's an election. Well, I don't think that's the plan at all. I think it's basically a clattering train that's out of control. I don't think that Keir Starmer is in any way in control of anything that's going on around him.
No, I think it's falling apart, and I think that increasingly, actually, the voters will be motivated by how do we get Labour out, and I think there'll be a lot of. There's been talk of a split on the right between Reform UK and the Conservatives. What I think will happen is that there'll be a lot of tactical voting, and that people will work out how best to remove the Labour government. So I don't think that will save them.
No, I don't think it will. But the big issue right now on the plate of the Prime Minister is the grooming gangs, because it's been raised by Elon Musk and it's now sort of raging around the country. There's a vote today which Labour are going to put a three-line whip on its members of Parliament to say you cannot vote alongside Kemi Badenoch and ask for an inquiry into this. An awful lot of people in this country think that's the wrong decision, and that should be left for members of Parliament to be able to vote with their consciences. So he's going to upset even more people, presumably, later on today.
Yes, there was an email from Kemi Badenoch yesterday. People said, what's the point of the inquiry? Why do we need another? Why would this statutory inquiry be different? And she said it's to identify those public servants who facilitated or ignored this abuse so they can be removed from their roles. I think that's the key point of why we need a proper inquiry with statutory powers where people can be hauled before it, and they have to appear, and they're under oath, because these people who have turned a blind eye, it's not holding them to account isn't just about justice for the victims, although that's important. Yeah. But we've still got these people, the social workers and the counsellors and the police officers and people at the Crown Prosecution Service and the politicians. Probably some of these people are still in positions of authority, and that's why this isn't just a historic thing of now everything's fine. It's not fine. This is still happening because these people with their warped political correctness, let's not cause tensions or whatever. They're still in many cases people in authority, and that's why we need an inquiry.
Yes, I think that's right. And I mean, I was just talking to a barrister who's been involved in many of these cases who said, you know, it's not, perhaps inquiry is the wrong word, because some people think, you know, yes, there has been an inquiry, nothing really came out of it, nothing really was actioned as a result. You know, Keir Starmer says he now wants to action some of the things recommended in that J report. But in fact, in the end, not much was paid attention to about grooming gangs in that report in the first place. So perhaps it's a proper police investigation that's required to discover who these people were who covered up and what they were doing and what their role was and where they are now, and bring them to justice.
It's about naming the culprits, naming the guilty men and women, and of course the reason the Labour Party doesn't want this inquiry is that some of them may well be still in prominent positions in the Labour Party. They may be council leaders, they may be former councillors who are now Labour MPs, there may be police and crime commissioners, and so that's the real reason why the Labour Party think, oh well, maybe in the future we should have tougher rules about it. But so far as what's happened in the past is concerned, let's forget about it. It's all a bit too awkward, all a bit too sensitive, and they're not going to get away with it because there's understandably huge anger about that. Given the industrial scale of the most revolting gang rapes, people have said, well, shouldn't we calling it grooming? Which makes it sound rather sort of gentle. This was the most brutal,
very violent.
Astonishing that it happened on such a scale. Now they're saying 50 towns and cities. So the idea of one local inquiry where a local council marks its own homework, or some broader thing about child abuse where it covers a whole lot of other issues apart from these rape gangs. That doesn't answer the point. What we need are people who allowed this to happen, who allowed these crimes to continue. We need them held to account. We need them prosecuted, or at the very least removed from positions of authority. And that's what the Labour MPs will be voting against today.
Yes.
I mean, that is completely unacceptable.
Absolutely right. And so many Labour MPs, and I include some senior people like Angela Rayner, you know, whose constituency borders many of the places where this stuff happened, have said nothing about it. They've been very, very quiet. Jess Phillips obviously has been in the firing line as well. She's refusing to have an inquiry. She's refusing to be suckered into that. But, you know, there's a general kind of culture of silence about all of this. I saw Stephen Kinnock being interviewed on Newsnight the other night, got himself in all sorts of messes, as tangled up. He couldn't answer the question as to who the far-right people were that were jumping on bandwagons, according to Keir Starmer, who basically accused everybody who wants an inquiry of being far-right, which was insane.
Well, and that shows that the mentality hasn't gone away. That was always all along the mentality. This is a bit awkward. If we arrest these people, then it'll become apparent that they're disproportionately Pakistani men, and that will then encourage the far right and encourage community tensions. Absolute nonsense. What encourages the far right is anger at the establishment covering it up and tolerating it. The way to avoid community tensions and avoid extremism is to uphold the rule of law without fear or favour, and it should be irrelevant if anybody's involved in crime of any kind. Certainly raping a teenage girl, then the law should be vigorously upheld, and there shouldn't be any exceptions to that. And very clearly there were exceptions based on race, and that is what has naturally fueled great anger and great distrust in the system, great distrust in the establishment.
Yeah, no question at all. Let's have a look at what Jess Phillips had to say about a national inquiry.
When I was asked to make that decision, my instinct was to try and get for Oldham what I'd seen in Telford.
Which was locally led?
Locally led, independent inquiry.
And that's what she now says that she wants to see. But of course, that's not necessarily what will solve the problem, because it wasn't just about Oldham, was it? It wasn't just about one place. It was about a variety of places, as many as 50 different towns and cities that had this problem. You know, and you can't just assume that each one of those cities and towns was a sort of a case unto itself, that it wasn't in any way connected to any of the others.
Well, she's saying everything's fine and dandy in Telford. I mean, let's see if people in Telford have that confidence. I rather doubt it. But she also said that, as far as Oldham is concerned, quite remarkably, she turned down the request from people in Oldham for a public inquiry, a statutory national public inquiry, without even meeting or talking to people in Oldham. Right. I mean, which is absolutely unbelievable. I mean, of course, another factor for people like Jess Phillips is that they're very worried about votes in their own constituencies, and I would love to say that this attitude is from a small minority of Muslims. I think most Muslims do believe in the rule of law and do accept the British way of life, but there's a substantial number of Muslim voters who don't, and Jess Phillips has had trouble in her own constituency in Birmingham from that section of the electorate, and undoubtedly that's another conflict of interest that a lot of Labour MPs face.
Yes, exactly right. Harry, good to talk to you. Thanks very much indeed. Harry Phibbs, columnist for Conservative Home there.
I'd like to say I'm now joined in the studio by the Iranian human rights campaigner Lily Mu, who believes that the government should launch a national inquiry into the grooming gang scandal. Lily, welcome to the studio. Pleasure to have your company.
Thank you for having me.
I wanted to ask you, as an Iranian woman, you have a special insight into perhaps the backdrop, the cultural backdrop that you believe exists in Britain that may be poisoning young Muslim boys to act in a despicable way towards white girls. Tell me more.
I was shocked to experience this personally. Growing up in Birmingham, I went to a school that was predominantly Muslim, and 92% of the population of that school were Muslim kids. And girls and boys, as wonderful as they were, boys were poisoned into sexualizing any girl who is not a Muslim girl, to the point that that they were like in the madrasa, a lot of the boys would go into a Friday school where the imam would make it okay and even encourage them to assault teenage young white girls because they want it. That's why they come out looking like they do. And they should only protect and respect a Muslim woman or a Muslim girl who is fully covered up. Therefore, it's open season on all the white girls or any non-Muslim girl, to the point that we had nicknames like Gories for the white girls and Kalas for the black girls, to whoever wants to hit on someone or demean them or verbally assault. I was verbally assaulted by so many boys who had no idea what they were even talking about. And I'm a very confrontational person. If anybody would talk to me in a disrespectful manner, I would make sure they understand that they have done this, and I would shame them in that moment. Most girls don't have that ability. Most girls in schools, especially children, they don't know how to defend themselves against such language and behavior. And then they're being bullied into submission, and then eventually sort of a lay of the land is you bully the girls in schools into submission until they've been taken into the gangs.
It's incredible to hear this, and it will no doubt raise a lot of concern in the political class, in the police class, and people will be clutching their pearls across the land about this, because this is the secret that dare not speak its name. It's one thing, though, Lily, to learn that those coming from abroad into our country may hold those values, but it's quite another to learn that they may be being taught them within our country.
It's all
That's
being
an
taught
incredible
inside
claim.
of the UK. It's all being taught inside of the UK by madrasas, the Islamic schools for boys, and BBC has even done documentaries on these. They're all on YouTube. This is all public information. What shocks me, though, is that why is it that the victims and the survivors are being treated like they should not be believed? Who in their right mind would accept a child being sexually exploited and say that this child is making it up?
And yet that is happening.
It is happening,
and
and it's
despite the
being
fact
hidden.
that we have 12-year-old girls being gang raped, being given contraceptives by the police. We had
It's an atrocity.
We had a girl yesterday, Scarlett, who was 13 at the time. Her father used to go trying to find her across the town. She'd been force-fed drugs, force-fed alcohol, multiple men abused. He didn't even remember it, and yet not a single person has ever been committed for any of those atrocities. Why is it, do you think, Lily Moo, that the authorities are so terrified of the Muslim community and they just don't seem to have the guts to tackle it?
I believe the whole culture of victim blaming and pushing the sin of being a woman is an embedded cultural reality in the Muslim ideology, or at least not all practicing Muslims have this ideology and belief, of course, but the extremist politicized Islam that's fully embedded into the country now. I mean, we have 85 Sharia laws in this country. There is no need for a Sharia law. In a Sharia law, a rapist is basically is the victim of the story because he was tempted to sin against a young girl. Child marriage is allowed under Sharia law. What is happening to the UK when a white British girl is raped and killed and then they call that an honour killing? What is happening to the UK? I mean, if there is not going to be a national inquiry, what is going to happen? Because the politicians who are already in power right now, today our Prime Minister, he was in power 10 years ago when he could have done something about it. And today he has the audacity to say he did something about it. Well, it's truly showing otherwise. There are victims who have no support. There are families who are ashamed of even speaking up about this. There are girls who don't believe this even happened to them because they are so afraid of the reality of accepting such horrors that they've endured. They want to believe they were in a relationship. It's appalling. It's heartbreaking. See, my brother was bullied in school because I come from Iran and we were not Muslims. After I left my high school, my face was cut out on a picture and put on a porn website. And the Muslim boys in school were passing this picture around to each other to the point that we had the police involved. All of this record is there. And they had my teenage brother's nose was broken and beaten because he wouldn't stand for such rudeness and foul behavior. Everywhere my sister and I were to go, living in the West Midlands at the time, was always with an escort so that we would not be preyed upon. It was not a safe place, and nobody wants to talk about that.
Well, thank you very much for coming in and sharing. This is incredible. I often find myself, just like lost for words. Lady Moo, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Coming up, God, I've got to stop doing this. It's not about me, I'm just sorry. I'm just so moved by all this. Now, coming up, data exclusively seen by GB News reveals that the pensioner vote for the Labour Party has collapsed. Now, the Conservative leader, Kemi Badenoch, has said that the Tories will put forward an amendment to the Children's Wellbeing Bill to require a full national inquiry into the rape gang's grooming scandal. And meanwhile, Reform has said that if Labour do not hold a full public inquiry into the rape gangs before the end of the month, or at least commit to one, then Reform UK will say that they will appoint independent ex-judges and experts. Nigel Farage said earlier on today that he would pay for his own report. Well, loads to talk about there. And I'm joined in the studio by GB News' political editor, Chris Hope. Chris, this scandal now is gathering a huge amount of momentum, and it's forcing parties to take a position. Perhaps 14 years too late. The Conservatives are crying for a full inquiry. They're trying to force a vote through. Is it performative? Does it have any teeth?
The answer is yes and no. Yes, it is performative, and no, it has no teeth. So what happens tomorrow is the Tories have tabled an amendment to the Children's Wellbeing Bill at the second reading. That means it's a reasoned amendment. If voted through, which it won't be because the majority of Labour MPs against it, it will sink the entire bill. The Children's Wellbeing Bill includes all sorts of things, including capping children's school uniform bills. So it's a well away from the very serious issues we're talking about here with child grooming and abuse mainly by Muslim men. So it's performative in the sense that Labour will have to require its MPs to vote against the amendment or abstain, and that means that whenever the next election is, you've got an opportunity here for the Tories to say, when we try to have a national inquiry into the grooming gas scandal, your Labour candidate didn't support it, either voted against or abstained. So there's lots of battles going on here in politics. We've also got Daisy Cooper, she's the deputy head of the Lib Dems. She wants Kemi Badenoch to fire Robert Jenrick for saying that the UK had imported hundreds of thousands of people from alien cultures who possess medieval attitudes towards women. So around all this sort of hot air, anger, fury, the issues, the concerns of the victims, so amazingly brought to our attention by Charlie, our colleague, and also yourself, Martin, on this show, is not being talked about. It's
astonishing, don't you think, though? I mean, OK, Robert Jenrick used some fruity language there. Alien cultures, medieval attitudes to women. But the Liberal Democrats saying you should be fired for that. Isn't this the point all the way along? If you dare to raise uncomfortable truths, you're stamped on, you're silenced, you should be cancelled and fired. This is the problem. But I hasten to add, this performative chest puffing by the Conservative Party, they declined a national inquiry in 2022. They had 14 years to do an inquiry. They've been forced into the open because of this reporting, because of Elon Musk, because of Charlie Peters. Is it too little, too late? And then moving on to Nigel Farage. He sees all this from the sidelines. He's saying he'd like to fund their own report. Is that a good idea? Would that be apolitical?
I think it'd be quite easily disregarded, I'm afraid, by critics of his, saying you're just trying to keep it going for your own political benefit. Number 10, for its part, say that a Farage inquiry is not justified. Their position this morning, and still stands, is that the Baroness J report, Alexis J report, out in 2022, that lasted 7 years, 18 strands, one of them including child sexual exploitation, 7,000 victims. It looked across the piece from churches, schools and the like. That was a full national inquiry, the J report. The time has passed for more inquiries, number 10 say. We don't need more research into the issue. We know what it is. Therefore, they will not do a full inquiry. Now, critics would say if you did a judge-led inquiry, that judge could look at the approach of the CPS when a certain man called
Keir
Starmer was in charge. And the police, and some would say, many on GB News's our platforms would say, there's been just 6 towns mentioned in the J report. There were sample towns. We have found 50 towns, as we know from yesterday, where there's been court evidence about grooming gangs. What are those gangs? What were those towns? Why are they not being talked about? The issue of being a far right to call for it, that was Keir Starmer in that press conference I was with him yesterday. Number 10 say today that no, it's not far right to call for an inquiry. We had it on the channel on your show yesterday. You had I think guests saying as much. They're saying it's only when politicians jump on it when it becomes far right. To which the question is, well, what is far right? Because calling for an inquiry isn't far right. Is it only when it's done by politicians? Is that far right? But they've clarified that newspapers calling for inquiry is not far right by them. So again, I go back to the original point you're making while I'm supporting you. The victims are being forgotten here as all these battles are fought about who's to blame. And the truth is the Tories didn't do anything about it for 14 years, and Labour are trying to implement the J review, 20 recommendations, only 4 of them have started work so far, 16 with no timescale to deliver them.
Meanwhile, when we talk to people like Sam, the 12-year-old that was raped, Charlie Peters earlier today, Marlon yesterday, whose 13-year-old daughter was raped, Scarlett. They all want a national inquiry, a transparent inquiry. The trouble is, they don't have any faith in any inquiry. They've been repeatedly failed by every agency in the land. Can I ask you another point? Do you think the Labour Party's got a far-right problem? They call everything far-right they disagree with, and it's severely annoying a lot of people. It's dividing society, and it's putting everybody, even people who've been raped, even fathers whose daughters have been kidnapped, into the same camp as their bogeymen, like Tommy Robinson. Somebody, I think, should have a word with them. Stop calling everything you don't like far-right. It's dividing society.
Were they here, Labour would definitely say they're not trying to call the victims of this.
But that's the way it came across yesterday. Maggie Oliver, the tireless campaigner, was disgusted.
They've clarified they were trying to talk about politicians, although people took it to assume anyone calling for an inquiry. Indeed, that's how many interpreted it this morning. They are trying to say, no, that's not the point. But the idea of going back to the recourse of saying far right, we saw it last August with those riots, which everyone condemned the riots after the 3 girls being killed in Southport. No one accepts as anywhere acceptable, and nor is remarks on social media. But to say you're concerned about immigration last August was apparently a far-right position to take, and that's what so annoyed our viewers and listeners. There's a habit here of this government, it looks like, going towards a far-right smear on people who arguably have legitimate concerns.
OK, Chris, so thank you very much. I look forward to speaking to you again in the next hour.
Safeguarding Minister Jess Phillips is heading back at Elon Musk after he branded her a rape genocide apologist for refusing to fund an inquiry into grooming gangs. The other thing I have is why we keep on just using this term grooming gangs when they're not grooming gangs. The thing is, we've got to understand is that they are rape gangs. And I just think this makes it sound not so bad. Well, they're grooming. They're saying, oh, come here, little girl, you're nice, have a sweetie. No, it's not. They raped these children, and we should be saying that. That's what it should be. Anyway.
Well, the Labour politician reacted on a podcast calling Elon Musk ridiculous and accusing him of spreading disinformation. Well, that is as the Conservatives are expected to bring forward an amendment to the Children's Wellbeing in Schools Bill for a full inquiry. That's been read today. But Downing Street is set to whip Labour MPs into voting against it. That's despite the Shadow Home Secretary Chris Philp calling Labour's decision moral cowardice. Well, we can now speak to our national reporter, Charlie Peters. Let's go to Charlie. Charlie is out and about touring the country, in areas where there has been awful effects of these gangs. And today, Charlie, it's Rochdale, and you're in Rochdale and you're heading to Rotherham.
Good morning, Eamon and Ellie. Yeah, that's right. We'll be speaking to more survivors and campaigners now in South Yorkshire later today. I will be speaking before I leave Rochdale to another political councillor around here who will urge for the Labour Party to vote for this amendment today. He's now an independent councillor. He has said that it is urgent that a national investigation takes place into this national scandal. But we heard last night from Jess Phillips, who said that Elon Musk's misinformation and the attacks on her had made her at risk, that her security measures had been improved. She also said that she was apoplectic at the slow response to implement child abuse inquiry recommendations. However, survivors around the country, and especially in Oldham, also in Greater Manchester, told me that they were also extremely angry that it took 4 months for Jess Phillips to respond to a letter from Oldham Council urging a public inquiry into their rape gang's travesty. Now, we revealed exclusively last Wednesday that Jess Phillips had rejected that request. She apologised to the council for the very slow response, but she's not apologised to the survivors. Indeed, last night she confirmed that she has yet to speak to a single victim from Oldham on this scandal. So they were asking me last night, how could she so confidently make this decision to turn down an independent investigation into Oldham when she's never met with the survivors here, when they don't know the local intricacies and the issues behind why the survivors and campaigners have called for another government-led review into the town. Well, that stern reaction from those survivors in Oldham comes as the government prepares to vote against a Conservative amendment which would launch a national public inquiry into every town and city where these reports of on-street grooming, rape, abuse and torture gangs have occurred in the United Kingdom. As we understand it, there will be a 3-line whip from Labour on this. Anyone who votes against this amendment, they said, could block their schools bill, which would be a problem for the government's wider agenda, and they will lose the Labour whip if they vote in favour of having that national investigation. Now, the government say that the child sexual abuse inquiry launched by Professor Alexis Jay has already done all of this work. But this morning we've also heard from the former chief reporter of the Times newspaper, Andrew Norfolk, the man who really broke this scandal nationwide in 2011. He said that we still don't understand the origins of this crisis. He also said that Alexis Jay's report shied away from assessing many of those causes. He said that many people still fear being called Islamophobic for getting involved in this sort of discussion. And that comes after the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, on Monday said that people calling for a national public inquiry were jumping on the bandwagon and the poison of the far right, another government intervention that has caused so much anger. Also, as Jess Phillips, the Safeguarding Minister, has defended the government last night, saying that their decision to implement new measures on Monday, with the Home Secretary Yvette Cooper making that emergency statement to the House. Jess Phillips has said that that was not something that she was rushed into, and the government was not rushed into by virtue of the increased attention on this grooming gangs scandal. However, those plans were made, as we said, as an emergency motion. It only was put forward 3 new policies after all the focus on this issue, after all the focus on how the Labour government has rejected and stood by its rejection of an independent inquiry, not just in Oldham, but nationwide.
Thank you, Charlie, and good luck with your journey today. Good hearing from you. Thank you very much indeed. So, Charlie, keeping the spotlight very much on this. And as we go to Catherine Forster now, who is our political correspondent, Charlie just outlined the politics, the serious politics and the politicking behind all of this.
Yes, good morning, both. Well, it's a week since Charlie Peters broke that story on GB News about the Safeguarding Minister, Jess Phillips, refusing that national inquiry. And the consequences of that have been huge, haven't they? Amplified by Elon Musk. But today there will be a vote in Parliament. So what's going on in Parliament today is there is a children wellbeing and schools bill going through the House of Commons. There will be a vote on that. Now, what the Conservatives are doing is they have requested an amendment to that, and the amendment will call for a national statutory inquiry into historic child sexual exploitation focused on grooming gangs. Because remember, of course, the J report was much broader than that. It wasn't only into grooming gangs. There were about 6 towns touched on in that report in terms of grooming gangs or rape gangs. Eamon, as you so correctly say, it sounds much less horrific, in fact, than it actually is, the term that we use. But Charlie Peters' own research for GB News has revealed there's 50 towns, and very significant that Andrew Norfolk, who originally started to unearth this some 20 years ago for the Times, has supported these calls for a national inquiry. Now, what's likely to happen in the Commons is, first of all, it's up to the Speaker whether he will select this amendment. We don't know whether he will. We'll find out late morning. If he does, the Conservatives, of course, will vote for it. That will risk bringing the whole bill down if, of course, Labour didn't have a massive majority in the Commons. They do have a massive majority. This bill will go through. The amendment, if it's picked, will fail. But it's about the Conservatives drawing a line in the sand, putting a marker down, sending a message, and frankly, so that come the local elections or a general election in the future, they will be able to sort of name and shame Labour MPs, saying, look, this MP voted against a national inquiry. I thought it was very interesting what Jess Phillips said last night. It's taken a week to hear from her in public, the woman, of course, at the centre of this storm, a woman who has worked for many, many years to try to crack down on violence against women and girls. But, of course, she is the MP for Birmingham Yardley. There's a large Muslim population in that constituency. Some people do suspect that one of the reasons that Labour don't want this inquiry, beyond it being expensive, is that it will be potentially difficult for them, given that many of their voters are from the Muslim community. Now, Jess Phillips was asked about that last night, and she said that that was absolute rubbish. But I think it's significant that even the Times newspaper, who, as I said, led on this some 20 years ago, did raise that issue and did say that it would be unacceptable for the government to refuse an inquiry because it was worried about the political consequences.
OK, Catherine Forster there for us in Westminster. Thank you very much. Well, commenting on the criticism of Ms Phillips from Elon Musk, the Home Secretary Yvette Cooper has said the following, that the Minister for Safeguarding and Violence Against Women and Girls has dedicated her career to tackling sexual violence and abuse and to being a voice for victims and survivors of the most terrible crimes, including child sexual abuse.
A government spokesperson from the Home Office issued the following. No child should ever suffer sexual abuse or exploitation, and it is paramount that we do more to protect vulnerable children, which is why we are working at pace across government to drive forward real action to implement the recommendations of the independent inquiry.
Ben, we've been talking about Reform UK. Let's quickly dwell on our dreadful Prime Minister. What do you make of his, in my view, outrageous assertion that if you, me, anybody in Britain feels that there should be a new inquiry into the grooming gang scandal, that somehow we're far right, we're Adolf Hitler, we're nutters, we're climbing on the far right bandwagon. Where on earth did he get that idea from? And I believe in that statement he has made, God Almighty, he's made a lot of mistakes, but I think that statement was the mistake of his political life, to slur anyone in this country who thinks that justice for those victims should be obtained through a public inquiry. To say they're far right is disgraceful.
Yeah, it is utterly abominable to describe them as far-right, just as he described the protesters after the Southport killings as far-right. This man is obsessed with politicising criminal justice. People who are concerned about... people call them grooming gangs. They're not grooming gangs. They're gang rape gangs.
Raping gangs,
gang rape gangs. It's not even individuals raping these underage, vulnerable children. It is gangs raping them at the same time. Has he or Jess Phillips actually read the court excerpts of the experiences of these young girls? They were abused by multiple men all at the same time. Many of them age 9 through to 12, 13. And they were, I mean, I don't want to repeat it on air, what was done to these girls. It was torture. It was torture of the worst sort that most adults would absolutely collapse under and would never want to live again. What these girls went through was hell. For Jess Phillips to get up and say that her life is under pressure, it's a distraction from her main workload. Yeah. For God's sake, woman, understand the depravity of what has taken place. Yeah. It's not about you. It's not about any political disposition. It's about the abuse of underage, white, young British girls who often came for the protection of the state, and the state
and we let those kids down, and there are thousands of them, 1,400 in Rotherham alone, and Jess Phillips should call a public inquiry as Home Office Minister. The reason she won't is twofold. One, such an inquiry would put the microscope on Keir Starmer's tenure as Director of Public Prosecutions from 2008 to 2013. And let me tell you, he will not emerge from that in a good light. And secondly, it's pure political mathematics. Such an inquiry would alienate the Muslim community, and at the next general election, Labour need the Muslim vote. It is the most disgusting, disgraceful political cynicism I've ever seen, I think.
It is. It's abominable. And, you know, you and I can have debates about regulatory issues that we have with the EU, taxation levels, and we can have a laugh about that, and we can have, you know, kind of, it's a sort of light-hearted, by comparison, discussion. This discussion about young girls, underage girls, being tortured and abused by multiple men at the same time, then running to police stations, being accosted by people in the police station, being taken out and abused again, being traded in local councils, having social services turn their back on them, being arrested. These young girls, some of them were arrested by the police when they were in the presence of their gang rapers.
Yeah, and by the way, Ben, the apologists for not investigating this said that these girls, this was a lifestyle choice on their part to be raped when they were underage. It's a disgrace. We need to get to the bottom of it, and Labour blocking this inquiry to protect Keir Starmer and to keep the Muslim vote is vile. It's vile. That's what it is. Before you go, Ben, let me ask you, you'll be interesting on this, as you always are on everything, but in particular this. Robert Jenrick, the Tories. You can tell, by the way, the grooming gang is a big issue because the Tories, Kemi Badenoch, has actually said something about it. More to the point, Tory Robert Jenrick, he says, he's the Shadow Justice Minister, he says that one of the problems here is that men from foreign cultures are operating with medieval attitudes to women. He's talking about Pakistani men. Does he have a point?
85% of gang rapes in this country are committed by South Asian ethnic origin, mostly Pakistani. It's a matter of fact. So he has a point. The only point on which I would disagree with him is that I would say the medieval England was more civilized than what's taken place here.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, I'm assuming for these craven reasons we've been discussing, Ben, that we're not going to get this public inquiry that the public demand. We're demanding it, but this...
Actually, Kevin, we don't need a public inquiry. What we need is a specialist, dedicated section of the police recruited with a complete commitment to find all those in the police, in social services, and in local councils who were in positions of trust, in positions of safeguarding, identify them, question them, bring charges against them, and put them in jail. Treat them the way the Starmer treated all those who protested under the Southport, after the Southport killings. Throw the blooming criminal justice book at all those people who should have been protecting those young girls. We don't need an inquiry. We need them bloody arrested and incarcerated.
Yeah, I'll go along with that. We need something done, but what this Labour government is saying is they're basically going to do nothing. They all got terribly offended, didn't they, when Jess Phillips was in the firing line. They were great woman. She worked so hard for vulnerable kids. Well, she's not doing much for vulnerable kids who were victims of the grooming gang, is she?
I have no time for Jess Phillips. For her getting up now and for Starmer saying that she's going through a torrid time, if she can't take the heat, resign. Actually, the whole government should blooming resign. They brought this country to its knees in many, many respects within 6 months. Just go. Go, Jess. If you don't like it, go. Starmer, you don't like it, go. Call another election. Let's see what happens.
OK, Ben, listen, fantastic to talk to you as always. Thank Yasmin Qureshi, she's a barrister, relatively new MP. She's the MP for Bolton South and Walkden. Here's a very brief clip of her response to this petition and the debate.
This petition has grown, some of it to do with a lot of misinformation, some of it to do with foreign interference, and I do think, yes, well, you may laugh at it, but that happens to be correct as well.
No, it's not. No, it's not. What she's doing, she's trying to come up with an excuse for the popularity of this petition. This petition got 3 million signatures in record time because of the huge level of discontent with this government, the huge level of discontent with Keir Starmer as a Prime Minister. And Ms Qureshi is trying to say, oh, no, well, what is foreign interference? You know, that's why. So you're not getting... This is misinformation. What a load of rubbish. Absolute load of rubbish. Let's talk about this with contributor, columnist for the Daily Express and the Telegraph, Robert Taylor. Welcome, Robert.
Hello, Kevin.
I mean, it was classic, wasn't it? Yeah, I think these Labour politicians, the way I see this story, it's a story about the insular nature of the people who live in that artificial world called the Westminster bubble. So in her world, she cannot perceive, this is my speculation, of course, but I think I'm right, she cannot perceive that her government, her party, Keir Starmer, are genuinely, massively unpopular among the people of this country, which is why this petition got 3 million signatures in about 20 minutes. But her reason is foreign interference. Absolute nonsense. But I think she genuinely believes that. She cannot see just how phenomenally unpopular this Labour government has become in record time.
Yeah, well, she certainly came up with no evidence of any foreign interference. And when politicians assert...
You know, they seem to be trying to pass off these extremely difficult months, these extremely difficult times that they've been through, as, you know, classic teething problems. We're having to make the tough decisions first. You know, we're going through this rough period, but we'll be all right. Well, it's much, much worse than this. Most people believe that we are lumbered with potentially, after only 6 months, arguably the worst Prime Minister that this country has ever endured in modern times. And that is against stiff opposition. They don't seem to understand, many of these Westminster bubble Labour people don't seem to understand that what is going on right now in terms of the government is extraordinary. It is not to be expected. It's extraordinary. And it's pretty catastrophic for them, but they don't really get it.
Yeah, they're so used to being the good guys in opposition, where they can just throw bricks at the Tories, and quite a few of those bricks landed, of course. They're so used to the easy soundbite of opposition that when it gets to coming into government and finding, oh my goodness, it's not actually that easy. It's not to get growth in the economy. It's not easy to stop the boats. It's not easy to have the kind of society and integration and lack of crime that we'd all like. And suddenly they're faced with criticism and they're finding it impossible to deal with.
And what did you make of it? You know, I mean, this is the policies have been the problem. You know, the disastrous policies, you know, axing the winter fuel allowance, cutting inheritance tax for farmers, alienating rural communities. So many policies have gone down like a cup of cold sick with the entire population, which is, you know, the main reason this government's in trouble. But also we have a Prime Minister who just seems to stumble from one self-made catastrophe to the next. Now, I thought he was way off beam in the summer when he decided that everyone who was protesting, everyone who was upset about the migrant crisis was somehow a far-right thug. And much, much worse than that is what he said yesterday when he said that anybody who feels, who believes there should be a new public inquiry into the grooming gang scandal is climbing on board the far-right wagon, the bandwagon, and that somehow, in other words, if you and I believe there should be a fresh inquiry into this scandal, we're far-right, we're extremists, we're Adolf Hitler. I mean, that was a really, really bad misstep by him to say that. People are furious.
Yeah, that was an almighty clangor. And it was a strange one for him to make, because otherwise he actually had people on his side in what he was saying about Musk and, you know, interfering in British politics. In my opinion, Kevin, I don't know your view on this, in my opinion, British people don't particularly like foreign interference. We didn't like it when Obama said we'd be at the back of the queue if we voted for Brexit. We didn't like it when Francois Hollande of France, the president before Brexit, said, I don't want to scare you, but there will be consequences if you vote for Brexit. We don't like it when Guy, and I hope I've got his pronunciation right, Guy Verhofstadt, the former Prime Minister of Belgium, weighs into the Brexit debate and continually tells us that we've made a horrible mistake. So Starmer had us on his side, or a lot of us on his side yesterday, but then he drops this immense clangor by saying anyone who thinks that the child abuse scandal is far right. It was such a stupid own goal from the Prime Minister.
And people are furious. But it did at least give us a window into Keir Starmer's definition of what far right means, because we're always saying, you keep criticising the far right, all you Labour lot, and far right thugs. What do you mean by far right? Could you define that? And they always go strangely silent at that point. They can't quite define it. And now we know what Keir Starmer's definition of far right is. It's anyone who disagrees with him or anyone who does something that he doesn't like. They're far right. It's as simple as that. The guy, I mean, we're talking now about his mental apparatus, which I do not think are in good order.
Yeah, it's a very lazy deduction to make, isn't it, from the Prime Minister? And it was very lazy, by the way, and just hypocritical of the MP Yasmin Qureshi to say in the House of Parliament today, over the last 14 years, we, Labour, didn't commandeer a public petition to demand a new election. Well, of course they did. What was the people's vote all about? The people's vote, which, by the way, Qureshi was in favour of and voted for, was all about overturning the democratic decision of the British people. So what she said in Parliament today was the height of hypocrisy, I'm afraid.
Yeah, I mean, she's a barrister. Keir Starmer's a barrister. Do you know what would make Parliament, would make the House of Commons much better? Would be as if we banned lawyers from becoming MPs. That place is infested with windbag legal briefs, and it is a problem. It is a problem. It really is. But going back to Keir Starmer, he's not going to be forgiven for this, is he? I mean, people are seething mad. And, you know, what it struck me as, even on a cynical basis, Robert, he's such an inept politician. He didn't think that through. You know, how can you possibly say that someone who is concerned about the fate of those poor little girls, the thousands of poor little girls who were raped and sexually abused, someone who feels that they deserve justice with some kind of inquiry, how can you say that they are far right? It's disgraceful, and he didn't think it through, did he?
Well, it makes one think, perhaps unfairly, but it makes one think, what is he trying to hide? Why is it that this Labour government is so afraid, it would seem, of a full national inquiry? We can still implement the J review on child sex abuse that reported in 2022. We can do the two together. It's not either or. So it does make you think, when Starmer comes out with this sort of throwaway line about the far right, what's he trying to deflect from? What's he trying to hide? If he hasn't got anything to hide, well, fine, let's then have the national inquiry and get it all out in the open.
Yes, indeed. And, I mean, in terms... How does he get out of this? I mean, how can he emerge from this with any dignity or any popularity at all? I think he's really cooked his goose this time.
Well, you know, I was talking to someone just this evening about this, and I was saying I'm not sure that there is a way back to popularity for Starmer. He's made, and the Labour government as well, they've made so many catastrophic errors. All that goodwill on a third of the vote that they came in with in July has gone. The only people who still believe them are the absolute hardcore Labour that will always vote Labour. Yeah. Is there actually a way back? The only way back, Kevin, and I've said this to you before, I think, is if the right, in Reform and the Tories, if the right continues to split down the middle, then there's another route for Starmer to get in on around a third of the vote next time. But I can't see already how he's going to do better than a third of the vote.
I agree with you. And one last problem, I think, for Labour, another miscalculation on their part, is this. They're now positioning, today, very busily positioning Jess Phillips as a victim of vicious trolling on social media, death threats, horrible names and everything like that. Now, of course, we don't condone that. That's a horrific thing it's a nasty thing to happen to anybody. I know this, it happens to me virtually every single day. But Jess Phillips, she's the victim. Now, as I say, we don't condone that, but frankly, this is inappropriate. We're not thinking about this big old politician, the Home Office minister, as a victim. We're thinking about the victims of the grooming gangs. And we're thinking this is the Home Office minister who's blocked an inquiry into that scandal. So, again, they've miscalculated. They got this wrong. People are angry about Jess Phillips, even though the Labour Party seems to think she should be beatified right away, as Wes Streeting said. She's a great woman. Have I missed something here?
Yeah, it's very tone deaf, and any time that you read about this child abuse scandal, it just gets worse and worse. I was reminding myself of it tonight before coming onto your show, just how appalling those crimes were. These are kids suffering the most appalling abuse. That's really what we should be worried about. Politics is a rough old game, and so is presenting radio programmes, Kevin. You do get abuse, you throw abuse, get it. We all know that's the game. It's not about you, Jess Phillips. It's about these girls who were appallingly abused.
Yeah, they've got themselves into a real pickle this time, Labour. And as you say, Robert, it's hard to see how Keir Starmer will ever negotiate his way or navigate his way out of this. Just the last point, I had Rod Liddell on who's earlier in the show, who's pretty well connected, and he's hearing and he believes that Starmer might not last very long. There's more and more talk that Labour have had enough of him as well. Welcome back. I'm still with columnist Rod Liddle. And never mind anything else, we've got a big announcement to make. Rod's joining the presenting fraternity. You're going to be on Times Radio every Saturday, 10 a.m. until 1 p.m. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah, they've given me the show. It's wonderful and and obviously incredibly terrifying. And if I can come close to the panache and skill with which you conduct your affairs, mate, I'll be all right.
You'll be all right, Rod. Well, that's very kind of you to say that. But put it this way: you'll be an interesting addition to the Times stable. It's going to be great.
Look, one of my first guests on it is the brilliant Trevor Phillips. Sir Trevor Phillips and. Trev is also not just a brilliant journalist and a politician, but also a bit of a friend of mine. I rang him up and I said, look, I'm doing this show. It's 3 hours. Would you be able to come on any time? Because I'd love to have you. And he said, yeah, put me on an early one before it gets taken off air. That was his, which I think is fair enough. So Trevor's on the very first one, along with someone who I would argue is our best politician who never became Prime Minister. But I'll leave you to work out who that might be nearer the time.
OK. If you ever need guests, you got my number. I'm available.
Oh, yeah, so I'll definitely be on the phone, mate. Definitely be.
It's about time I appeared on Times.
Politics and books and everything and reviews and so on.
Yeah, they don't usually have a low rent scum like me on Times Radio. So let's break the mould.
Kevin, they're using me, mate. They're using me.
Yeah, if they're going to use you, they'll have me on. Yeah. Let's quickly talk about Farage and Elon Musk. There seems to have been some kind of thawing out of this feud. I mean, frankly, I've just found it very, very funny. Farage was, he had the wind knocked right out of his sails, didn't he? This guy's not fit to be the leader. He hasn't got what it takes. I think, what do we take from this? What do we deduce from this? Is it that Mr. Musk is somewhat unpredictable?
Well, of course, he's not a politician, and he doesn't. Oddly enough, for someone who's an entrepreneur and is supposed to see into the future and be schematic about things, he doesn't do any of that stuff. He just shoots straight from the hip and says whatever he means. Now, it always occurred to me, and I think I said this on your show weeks ago, Kev, that I have grave doubts about that $100 million donation because it seemed to be so vague, you know?
Yeah.
And whenever I heard Richard Tice or Nigel Farage talking about it, I thought, you haven't got that money, have you? And I know about that stuff because I try to raise money for the Social Democratic Party, and we're always on the cusp of getting £1 million, but we never actually get it.
Yeah,
do you know?
Yeah.
So I think that's part of the problem. I think, you know, the Tommy Robinson issue is an interesting one, and seen from afar, and indeed seen close up, if you try to shed yourself and tell yourself that you're not hitching yourself to a far right-wing bandwagon, that man has not received what I would call proper justice from the British judiciary.
I agree. I think there's a big argument to say he is a political prisoner. You know, I mean, he's got something of a nefarious background, but the problem for Farage, and Farage knows it, is that Tommy Robinson is very popular among the ranks of Reform UK. And when Farage and Tice, both of whom I like and admire, they start saying, oh, well, you know, he's a criminal. They start sounding like Labour and the Tories. They start sounding very mainstream, and Reform UK supporters do not want mainstream politics. They want something different. So this is a very awkward territory for Nigel Farage, I think.
It is awkward territory, and there are two things. You have to separate what the British state has done to Tommy Robinson to what Tommy Robinson has done himself. And a lot of what he's done is pretty much reprehensible, I think. However, how he's been treated by the British state is what you might expect in Russia, frankly.
Yeah.
You know, it has been quite appalling. And just to add in, just to go back to the BBC, why do they always say Stephen Yaxley Lennon, also known as Tommy Robinson? They never say, when they're introducing a transgender athlete, and this is Lawrence Smith, also known as Loretta Jeannie Smith. They never say that, do they?
No, they don't.
That's the only...
Gee, I wonder why. I wonder why.
That's the only time they don't do it. I think it's a very, very tricky issue. And I also look at myself and think, you know, should I have... I've stuck up for the way in which Tommy Robinson has been treated by the courts a couple of times without necessarily receiving much praise from my editors for doing so. And I wonder if I've done enough, and if any of us journos have done enough, just to say that this is not how it should be, you know?
Yeah.
And I don't think it is.
As I say, the problem for Farage and Tice is Tommy Robinson is pretty popular among many of their supporters, and that's why it's a difficult road for them to travel. I'll tell you what, Rod, when we finished this customarily entertaining chat, why don't you get in touch with Times Radio and say you've had a thought about your first show, you're going to dedicate it to Tommy Robinson and to launch a campaign to get him released from this unjustified jail term he's served. What do you think?
That would be brilliant, and Trevor Phillips's prediction would come absolutely true within the first hour, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it'd be good. You could be axed before you started. What do you think?
Before I started. It may well happen, Kev. It may well happen.
I'll tell you what, Rod, thanks as always, and I'll be tuning in on Saturday morning. Good luck with that, mate.
Oh, cheers, mate.
This morning, Bridget Phillipson. Good morning to you. Thanks so much for joining us. So as Leo has just mentioned, the Children's Wellbeing in Schools Bill gets its second reading today. There's quite a lot in it, which I want to get to. Is the main point of it to protect vulnerable children?
Yes, this is the single biggest piece of child protection legislation in a generation. We are determined that we have to make sure that our children are protected. This is work that has been underway for some time. So some of the key measures are around making sure we know where children are, what you were just talking about there in terms of home education. Alongside that we have information about, all information about what's going on in a child's life, so pulling that together. And multi-agency child protection teams, so police, education, children's social care, sharing that, keeping children safe, because you know we've heard a lot in recent days about the lessons that we have to learn. I've had enough of learning lessons. Now is the time to take action to protect children. One of the key areas where we know there has been failure time and again is where children aren't listened to, where action isn't taken, and where those who are meant to be working to protect children don't do that. And what I would say in terms of the choice today in what's happening in Parliament is that the Conservatives can back this, or as they're proposing, can kill stone dead this key landmark legislation. They have spent the last week or so touring studios like this, telling your viewers that they care about keeping children safe. Well, they should put up or shut up, vote for this legislation and do precisely that. Or is it all about grabbing a cheap headline and political opportunism?
There's a lot to get to because there's other details in the bill, which I guess a second reading debate is all about. But one thing I think, given the debates or arguments of the last couple of weeks that you're alluding to, that's interesting and to be absolutely clear on, this bill aiming to protect vulnerable children has been in the works from this government for many months, not in reaction to the last couple of weeks.
No, absolutely. This was work that we developed in opposition. It's been clear for some time what needs to change. We need to listen to victims, we need to listen to children and deliver what they need. Alongside that, we've had a lot of discussion in recent days about the response to Alexis Jay's national review. Again, across government, for some time, we've been working to respond to that, and that's why the Home Secretary was able to set out the plans to...
I mean, the UK has put Canada in the doldrums that it's in, and is also responsible for the state of your country, which is dreadful. And it's I don't know if you guys in the UK understand how sad it is for us in Canada and in the United States to watch what you're doing to yourself. I mean, the UK is a great country. When I go there, I go to Oxford, I go to Cambridge, to these remarkable places in London, see your unbelievable deep history, understand how much the world owes the UK in terms of, say, the establishment of common law and decent government everywhere, including places like India. We owe the UK such an immense debt. And to watch you guys like spiral yourselves into the ground for this idiot, weak political correctness that's gone so far that you can allow your working class women to be raped en masse sadistically and say nothing about it and gaslight people who are telling the truth. It's so sickening. It's so demoralizing. It's almost unspeakable. We all pray, hope and pray here in Canada and the US that you get your act together and grow some spine again and put your damn country back together and stand up to these bloody psychopathic bullies and the woke green mob, because it would be a dreadful shame to lose you.
Though in what Alexis Jay said yesterday, as it relates to Elon Musk's comments in the last couple of weeks, she didn't support people politicising her report and the overall grooming scandal, but she did say the row may have given this some kind of impetus to move forward. Do you agree that that has happened? It has been given an extra impetus, an extra focus?
I'm not interested in what he's got to say. All I'm interested in is how we keep children. I appreciate that. I'm interested in how we protect children and keep them safe from harm. And as I've been clear, we were working already on her national review, a national review which the Conservatives established, which we backed because it was absolutely the right thing to do, to understand how we tackle child abuse in all of its forms across our country. But what did they do with that review? It reported in 2022. They sat on it, and some of the very same people who were ministers, including in the Home Office, are now coming out and saying it's a national scandal that nothing happened. I agree it's a national scandal that nothing happened. Do they own a mirror? I mean, they are the very people that are responsible for the failure to act, and they are the same very people today, the Conservatives, who intend to block our legislation to keep children safe. I thought there wasn't a limit to how far they would sink, and I was wrong.
I mean, clearly the legislation will pass if Labour want it to pass, given the majority. Let's move on to the other parts of the bill, because clearly it is the Wellbeing and Schools bill, and the schools aspect is perhaps, I can't speak for them, they'll come on in an hour, some of the areas they push back on. One area that's got quite a lot of focus is the bill's aim to impose the national curriculum more rigidly on all schools, including academies, and to impose national pay scales, on all teachers. Will that reduce flexibility?
No, it's about increasing flexibility, because I've seen some brilliant examples in academies of how they've supported teachers, particularly around flexible working, and we face a big challenge around women in their 30s leaving teaching as they find it difficult to combine work and family life. So I've seen some great examples, but I want that to be available actually to all schools in a way that it's not at the moment. The measures around schools are about putting children right at the heart of this, about driving up standards and making sure that all children, wherever they are in the country, whichever school they go to, can expect a brilliant education. So yes, the national curriculum applying in all schools. That was something actually that the Conservatives back in the 80s introduced. I think that was a good principle then. I think it's a good principle now to make sure that there is a core entitlement for all of our children. I also want children to be taught by qualified teachers who've gone through that training and have got that ongoing professional development and induction. I find it staggering that they're opposed to teachers being qualified in front of the classroom. I mean, I find that just bizarre. But alongside that, the measures in the bill also include areas that I think will make a big difference to children and families and to many of your viewers. So rolling out breakfast clubs across our primary schools, a big support for families. Alongside that, cutting the cost of school uniforms, so limiting the number of branded items that families are expected to buy for their children.
The other big story of the day is that Robert Jenrick, we've talked about the grooming gangs, Robert Jenrick, the shadow justice secretary, the man who lost out to Kemi Badenoch in the leadership of the Tory party, stood up and used some very choice words today and said that the Tories, when or if re-elected, could seek to limit immigration to the UK from what he described as alien cultures. The Shadow Justice Secretary said this morning that we have seen millions of people enter this country in recent years, and some of them have backward, frankly, medieval attitudes to women. And he stood by his claim that the grooming gang scandal started with the onset of mass immigration. We're delighted to welcome former MEP and migration expert Stephen Wolfe. A very happy New Year to you, Steve.
A very happy New Year. If only we could say it was, really, but if for families, yes, but for some families, certainly not. And this is the case, what we're covering now.
Jenrick will be slaughtered by the bedwetters for the language that he used. I wanted to... I'm sure you weren't, because you were probably out buying that very impressive jumper yesterday, but Peter Bleksley was on the show. And what he said, I thought resonated, and he chose his words very well, and I probably won't do him justice. But he basically said that Britain is based on many good things. Charitable works, people with humanity and morality, and we've always looked out for people who are worse off and tried to do our bit across the world. Now, that should never change. But alongside that, there are now factually people coming to this country who are taking advantage of stretched resources, who are coming here because apparently they don't like the culture, the background from whence they came, and then they spend most of the time trying to trash what has been here for many hundreds of years and implement things that aren't popular. And I think the basis of what Peter said yesterday, which resonated with many people, was we're very happy to have people that can give something to our country. Don't take the PISS out of us. Work with us, be part of us, and that's the way of a civilised society. But that isn't happening. It's not harmonious, is it? It's a problem for millions of people.
Yes, and unfortunately, Robert Jenrick is correct, and those statements are accurate. And much of what happened and the changes that we see today, the cultural issues where people wish to pull down statues, where we have large gangs, as we know from Albania, according to the police, who now control marijuana, cocaine, sex trafficking, and of course the high-end car stealing, where we see people, and what we've talked about over the past few weeks, the recognised grooming gangs that looked at young girls in a disgraceful way because they were white. All of them and all of those attitudes have occurred since the mass migration that were introduced, first by Tony Blair, accelerated by Gordon Brown, and then exacerbated under the Cameron and Boris Johnson leaderships. That is where the problem has come. And if we look back very carefully to the immigration that we saw after the Second World War, the Windrush, those who came from Uganda, the Irish communities that have been settled here for over a couple of hundred years, all of them settled peacefully into the way that Britain was and the cultures that we had. Yes, of course, we saw discrimination towards them. And yes, of course, there were those within their own communities that weren't happy with where they lived and used choice words and languages, but they were in the minority. Today, we see something totally different. It's an us against them, and the language that we're hearing, the divisive language, white privilege. If you're white, you shouldn't get a job instead of someone who should be getting it because of their diversity, equality, and inclusion rights. This is not the nature of Britain as we knew it. This is not the nature of Britain as we accepted it after the Second World War with our open hands. This is the nature of politics today and culture today that is trashing our history and our past, when they're supposedly saying they've left awful places and want to stay in a nice place.
I think that's right, and I don't know if you heard, as usual, we haven't got that much time, but it's the story of the jazz teacher in the London College, this guy who for 50 years has lectured and played, and there was a questionnaire went round. I just did the story, Trinity in London, and he dared to send an email to the principal saying there isn't racism, there is equality, everybody gets involved, and it was leaked, and students refused to be taught by him, and the staff spurned him, and he's been trashed, and he's having to take legal advice from the Free Speech Union. I've always believed that we need to be open and honest about the things that are wrong. The problem is, when Robert Jenrick talks about alien cultures with medieval attitudes, the left wing jump up and down and say, you're all racist, this is outrageous. There isn't a racist bone in my body. genuinely hand on heart. What I will absolutely categorically say is I want all people to give something back to their society. I'm embarrassed at nearly 60 to live in a land right now under a government that thinks it's all right to freeze pensioners to death and now take away their prescriptions when they're over 60, when they've worked all their damn lives. I'm embarrassed to be in a country whereby we seemingly favour other people who have done nothing, whether they've come from another country or not, over people who have worked all their lives. And I think the cost of living crisis and how difficult it is for people has exacerbated this look at migration. And there will be some people who say it's not just migrants. No, it isn't just, but it's part of the issue. We are stretched and we are putting our own citizens at the back of the queue. And that, Stephen's not a good look, not for anybody.
No, it's
who wants an inquiry. Morning all, it's Wednesday, big day as I walk to work because it's PMQs and I'm going to be bobbing up to see whether or not the Prime Minister really thinks that anybody who wants an inquiry into the child rape gang scandal, does that mean we're all far right? Is that what it actually means? Also, we've got an amendment that we hope will be called to add the requirement for an independent inquiry into these grooming gangs, into the Children's Wellbeing Bill. Again, it'll be interesting. Will hundreds of Labour MPs say no? They don't want to know what happened. They don't want to get to the truth. They don't want to provide answers for victims and survivors. Not sure that's going to be a great look. It's going to be an interesting day. Morning all.
It's not a good look, and what's happening now is across the globe they're beginning to see it. And yes, people are saying, okay, this is a battle between Elon Musk, one of the wealthiest men in the world, and one of the most powerful in Keir Starmer. But the very idea that we've not had a proper investigation, and I've read both the reports by Lady J, and I don't agree that they actually do cover the main issue, which is why so many people ignored, for example, those young girls when they made those claims. But that is just another example to add to those that you've just mentioned about the way that we treat our pensioners, the way that we've treated our armed services, the way that we've treated people who've saved and contributed to this country, and the way that we ignore the mass economic and financial costs of large-scale migration. I've been on the show many times. I mean, I looked at last year alone, £1 billion has now been raised, if you want to put that, or earned in another way, by the people smugglers who have put over 151,000 illegal migrants into this country so that they can claim asylum. It costs us £8 billion a year. That's more than the amount of money that we're taking off those pensioners for heating.
Listen, Stephen, you know me, mate. I could talk to you for absolutely ever. We really appreciate you being on. Very much appreciate it. Thank you. Stephen Wolfe, migration expert, former MEP. Always welcome on Talk. Keen to get your view on the two main news stories that seem to be dominating. Calls for a national public inquiry into the grooming gang scandal. I'm going to call it the rape gang scandal because that's the truth. What I wanted to say, as I've said all afternoon, is I get the criticism of Keir Starmer. I'm the last person in the world that would compliment him. But this goes back decades. This isn't about Jess Phillips and Sir Keir Starmer. It might be in part about him as the Director of Public Prosecutions. I don't know. This is a stain on our country. This is a stain on us as a society. And somebody said to me earlier, which I think is absolutely spot on, if we looked at another country and saw this, we'd say it was barbaric. Absolutely barbaric. And I fear, love to know what you think, that the fact that this has been swept under the carpet for so long tells me there's so much more to this. And actually, this could go quite high up the chain. Thoughts?
You know, this is the worst scandal of the post-war period by a long stretch. It is shocking. It's one of the worst things that's happened in the modern history of our country. Because, you know, let's boil it down. What happened is that thousands of primarily white working class girls were assaulted or raped right under the nose of our bureaucracy. People knew this was happening and they looked the other way. I mean, this is one of the most shocking things that's ever happened. And I agree with you that it goes back way beyond, before Keir Starmer, before the current government. It's been going on for a long time. But, you know, what's unforgivable, I think, by Keir Starmer is for him to turn a discussion about protecting working class girls from rape into a discussion about protecting middle class MPs from mean words on Twitter. That is unforgivable, because he is taking the focus away from where it should be, which is how do we protect the most vulnerable members of society from the abuse of mostly Pakistani Muslim men, which is what these gangs were primarily made up of. He's taken the focus away from that and turned it onto his own MPs because they're getting some flack on the internet.
Well,
and
also, if you look back to the election, as I said earlier, there were 5 seats north of Watford Gap, because for a lot of people who don't believe it, there is a country north of Watford Gap. 5 seats were won by independent Muslim MPs who stood on the Gaza subject and nothing locally at all. Jonathan Ashworth, for example, lost his seat. And there are many people inside the Labour Party, and I wonder if Keir Starmer's part of that fear if they alienate the Muslim vote, they will lose power. Now, that for me is not a way to legislate. That's not a way to rule. That's not a way for the police to do their job. And in fact, the police admitted, didn't they, in Rotherham, that they were concerned over the years that it would cause cultural dissatisfaction. You break the law, you break the bloody law. It doesn't matter about the colour of your skin or where you come from, surely, or your religion. If you break the law, you face the consequences. It worries me that we're now getting to a point that could happen, but more so, why did nobody do anything? And do you believe that the reason is that this goes much, much higher and deeper than any of us can imagine?
I think there is still so much for us to find out, because there was a long period of time where we didn't really know this stuff was happening.
No,
I mean, the Times did some great coverage over the past 15 years, and I don't think we should ever forget what the Times did on this story. And I really disagree with Elon Musk when he said that the legacy media hid this atrocity for so long. That's not true. The Times was the paper that uncovered this atrocity. I will defend the Times to the hilt on that. But lots of other newspapers didn't touch it.
Why?
Why?
Reasons why? What do you think? You know more than me.
You know, I think it's because it actually disrupts their political narrative, because the woke political narrative says that white people are privileged and problematic, Asian people and Muslim people and brown-skinned people are oppressed, and then we have this scandal in which hundreds of primarily Muslim men were raping and abusing white working class girls. So it interrupted with their narrative. It intruded on their self-congratulating ideologies. And they discarded it. They thought, well, we can't handle this. It's the wrong kind of perpetrator and it's the wrong kind of victim, and therefore we're going to zone it out. And that's really what happened over the past 20 years. It is utterly unforgivable.
I mean, it is, if you think about it, as I said to you, any other country we would deem to be barbaric. I keep going back to it for a reason. I just feel that there is no... You talk about it gets away from the rhetoric for them is different, but surely any politician worth their salt would go, irrespective of my politics, I'm going to do the right thing by these innocent girls whose lives have been potentially ruined and blighted forever. And actually, I might find that a majority of people consider that morally the right thing to do.
You really would think that. And I've been thinking that myself over the past couple of days, but also over the past few years, because I've been writing about this for a long time, and I know lots of other journalists have been as well. But I think it really demonstrates the power of ideology. And what we have is a ruling class now, a kind of new leftish, pseudo-liberal ruling class that is so ensnared by this ideology that it is even willing to sacrifice the safety and dignity of working class girls at the altar of that ideology.
It's absolutely disgusting. And I genuinely believe, I mean, I've sat here for weeks and I've talked about this government and pensioners. I hope that if any politician from whichever party has any involvement or as wherever, on whatever level, that they are brought to justice over however long it takes, because These are kids, for Christ's sake. Nothing more. Kids.
I was
And
incredibly happy to see that last autumn the Royal Wolverhampton NHS Trust began enrolling patients in a global first trial of completely personalised cancer vaccines as part of a £1 billion investment negotiated by my department. This shows the way forward, and it shows the way that cooperating between departments is going to deliver for patients and public service users right across the country.
Robin Swan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Minister, the early diagnosis saves lives. Randox in my constituency run a number of NHS health checks from the Isle of Wight through to Lanarkshire. Will the Minister encourage the greater use of those checks and also visit Randox with me to see how we can further advance that technology?
I can confirm that by working with the Health Secretary, visiting just quite recently St Tommy's across the road here to see how new technology is being used in diagnostics, it is increasing the number of scans and the quality of the scans to diagnose disease early in order to prevent the disease having the worst outcome. This is being rolled out across the country, and I'm working very, very closely with the Health Secretary to make sure that innovations like this are put to the good use for the country.
Chair of the Select Committee, Trian Mora.
Mr. Speaker, last month's Select Committee brought festive cheer by hearing how British science is advancing the eradication of diseases such as cervical cancer, HIV, AIDS, malaria through innovative and exciting new treatments and diagnostics. But we also heard of the challenges of driving innovation through the NHS. Newcastle's biosciences company AMLO said that adoption is much quicker in the US, and others criticised bureaucratic procurement processes and a culture of inertia. Successive governments have struggled with this challenge. So what specific steps is he taking with the Health Secretary to make sure that British patients benefit from innovation?
Thank you. I'm very grateful for the question, but also to the work that her committee is doing in highlighting this incredibly important challenge that we face as a government and a country. I can say that the Health Secretary for the first time has adopted the role of spreading innovation through the NHS as a personal mission as part of the role of the Secretary of State for the first time. We both co-chair the Office of Life Sciences. Together, our two departments are not just trying to seek to harness the power of technology, but we're also working together under the leadership of the Health Secretary to drive that innovation, because it cannot be locked up in one innovative health trust. It must be put to use right across the NHS for every patient from every part of the United Kingdom.
Jim Shah.
Mr. Speaker, can I thank the Minister for his answers? What progress has been made on using AI algorithms to analyse medical images such as tumours, fractures or medical conditions? A pithy question, I think, Mr. Speaker.
I'm very grateful for his question, because having visited Huddersfield Hospital myself, one of the first hospitals to fully integrate AI into its radiotherapy work and its scanning work, I can say that having stood there and seen the power for early diagnosis, the ability to detect patterns at an incredibly early stage, I was left with no uncertain doubt that had my mother been scanned at that hospital, she would still be alive today. She was scanned 3 times, that missed the progress of lung cancer in her, and she died several weeks after collapsing, having it not been detected. This is the power of technology. It is a human power, AI, that will transform lives, and we are determined to make sure...
Secretary of State, please, you want me to get to these other questions, I'm sure. Liberal Democrat spokesperson Victoria...
Many of the companies that I've spoken to who are supporting technological innovation in the NHS and beyond talk about their frustrations at the comparative difficulty of getting funding in the UK, and say that the British Business Bank could do much more to de-risk investment and unlock innovation. So what are the government doing to reform funding and provide an oasis in what has become known as the funding valley of death?
Well, firstly, we've done is overall increase to record levels the investment of this government into R&D. You also see the really pioneering work that's going on through Innovate UK, ARIA and the different funding bodies that are available to take different levels of risk when it comes to supporting, creating and upscaling the innovation. The work the Chancellor is doing to reform our pension system in this country is going to unlock capital, because fundamentally we've got to get more capital, domestic capital, into the venture capitalist community so that we can get domestic innovation supported by domestic capital to upscale and solve the challenges that she's talking about.
Folks! Yeah.
question number 4, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Only this week we announced £289 million contract which will deliver gigabit-capable broadband to 131,000 difficult-to-reach premises across England and Wales. We are determined to make sure in every part of the country, including in his own constituency, that we reach all of these places.
Sir Ashley.
Mr. Speaker, I'm grateful to the Minister for his answer. In some of villages in my constituency, such as Cannington and Nether Stowey, fewer than 10% of households have access to gigabit broadband, and download speeds are amongst the slowest in the country. So can he advise how his department will ensure that under this new contract, Openreach fulfil their obligations and my constituents get that faster broadband?
Can I first of all commend the honourable member, because this is the 4th time that he's asked a question of me broadly in this territory. In the words of Browning, hark the dominant's persistence till he must be answered to. He's quite right. There are villages in his constituency where there is no proper gigabit-capable internet available. I am determined to make sure that that does happen. I'm very happy to meet with him because I am just, in the words of the musical Oklahoma, a girl who can't say no. I'm very happy to meet with him.
Oh, come on, Rebecca Ball.
Question number 5, Mr. Speaker.
Secretary of State. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The government has increased investment on R&D to record levels. We have also repaired the public finances, including the black hole left by the previous administration. We have done so by protecting the smallest businesses, by the impact of doubling the employment allowance to $10,500, meaning that 865,000 employers will pay nothing in additional tax.
I thank the Secretary of State for his response. However, universities, which are at the heart of the UK's research ecosystem, face an additional $372 million in annual costs due to the rise in employer national insurance. This threatens their ability to fund cutting-edge research, recruit top talent and support early career researchers. Does the Minister recognise the detrimental impact this will have on research in this country, and will he explore measures to ensure that our global competitiveness in science and innovation is not undermined?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We have found ways to get new investment into universities. We are putting them on a solid financial footing, and this is just the start. We always knew we couldn't fix all of the problems we'd inherited from that last administration in 6 months, but we're finding ways to take the great start forward to get new investment into universities, and I can reassure the House, the war on universities by that administration has ended.
Shall the Secretary of State, Alan Mack?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Companies like ours will be less incentivised to grow. That is the conclusion of Paul Taylor, founder of British tech unicorn Thought Machine, which employs over 500 people. Britain is now missing out on new jobs and investment as a direct result of Labour's national insurance jobs tax. But when the Chancellor started punishing our tech sector, the Secretary of State failed to stand up to her. Why?
Secretary of State.
We have put the public finances on a solid footing. Our economy is now in a stable way that has not been the case for 14 years. It is also the case that the party opposite wants all of the benefits of the last budget without saying how they will pay for any of it. And until they do, they will not be taken seriously by anyone, including the business that he references.
Alan Mack.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The truth is Labour is failing our tech workers because they don't care about our tech sector. Last September, Paul said he was very keen to list Thought Machine in London instead of New York. And one of his preconditions before listing is being able to grow the business as much as possible. So why did the Secretary of State allow the Chancellor to make growth harder for Britain's tech sector at this budget?
I think the honourable gentleman missed the investment summit that the government held just before Christmas, at which a record £60 billion was invested into this country, 24 billion of which was AI related. That is almost as much directly into AI than was committed in total in that government's previous investment summit in total. This government is unlocking investment. That government in the previous administration wrecked our economy, wrecked our public services, and failed to get faith in our economy so that foreign companies could invest in this country.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just in case the House didn't hear, this government is driving innovation with a record £20.4 billion of R&D investment for 25-26, powering an innovation-led economy across the UK. In Staffordshire, UKRI is backing over £29 million in 70 cutting-edge research and innovation projects. A standout example in innovative UK support for Staffordshire Net Zero Skills for Growth project is equipping the country to seize opportunities in the net zero transition.
Thank you. Towns like those in my constituency are key to the economy but can face unique challenges in accessing innovation opportunities. Please could the Minister tell me how she plans to ensure that towns like Stafford and Eccleshall are able to access new jobs, skills, investments and growth opportunities?
Minister.
I thank my honourable friend for that question. The Department has a clear vision to ensure that UK remains at the forefront of global innovation, a place where cutting-edge businesses of all sizes can start and grow and local people have high-quality jobs building on local strengths. And I'm delighted to hear about the new multi-million-pound facility at Newcastle and Stafford College's Stafford campus, supported by £15 million of government investment being built in my honourable friend's constituency, which will welcome learners from September. And this facility will help provide the technical skills businesses need both now and in the future to support regional and national productivity.
Lewis Atkinson.
Number 7, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. DSIT is leading the charge by establishing the Digital Centre of Government to harness technology and transform our public services. We are committed to improving digital inclusion and accessibility to ensure high-quality online services are available to everyone. And in the coming months, Mr. Speaker, the Department will outline its plans and priorities for Digital Centre and advancing its digital inclusion.
Lewis Atkinson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Sunderland was recently named the UK's smartest city by The Times, and it was a pleasure to welcome the Secretary of State to visit recently. More than 5,000 homes in our city now have assistive technology installed, supporting the independence of older and disabled people to improve their access to care. Can I ask the Minister how the Government plans to build on the example of Sunderland to improve access to public services across the UK?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my honourable friend for his question. The government recognises the potential for digital technology to support people to live independently, and we will set new national standards for care technologies and develop trusted guidance so that people who draw on care, their families and care providers can confidently buy what works and get the safest, most effective tech into their homes or services. In addition, Mr. Speaker, we'll be taking forward a range of initiatives in 25-26, including funding more home adaptations, promoting better use of care technologies.
Forward.
Steps is her department taking for older people who don't feel comfortable about utilising technology to access public services?
Minister.
I thank the honourable member for his question. We'd be happy to hear that the public sector body's accessibility regulation requires most public sector organisations to ensure their services are accessible to disabled people and older people by meeting the requirements of the Web Content Accessibility Guidance and by publishing a prescribed format accessibility statement. And the Government Digital Services Accessibility Monitoring Team reviews public sector websites to ensure compliance with the accessibility regulation and support departments to improve their services.
Shadow Minister Dr. Ben Spence.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome her approach to improve access through technology. However, the majority of concerns I and many colleagues receive are from those who cannot use technology. Rather than improve access, for some, technology can act as a barrier. What is her assessment of the impact of digital exclusion in the UK, and in the strategy that she's announced for digital inclusion, will this include digital exclusion at all levels of government?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, digital inclusion is a priority for this government, and we have set up the Digital Inclusion and Skills Unit to ensure that everyone has the access, skills and support and confidence to participate in modern digital society, whatever their circumstances. Work is ongoing to develop our approach to digital inclusion and coordinate across government departments, and we hope to announce more on this soon. We will be working closely with third sector, the industry, devolved governments and local authorities to ensure future interventions are targeted and based on individuals' needs.
Right, we come to topicals. Zoe Franklin.
Question 1, Mr. Speaker.
Secretary of State.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we have seen fear and lies spread about life in Britain. To those who have done little or nothing to combat child sexual abuse are stretching every sinew to jump on that bandwagon. This government is committed to justice for the victims and punishment for the perpetrators of abuse wherever it happens, to whoever who commits it. And on that, I pay tribute to the work the Prime Minister and in particular my honourable friend, the member for Birmingham Yardley, did in this regard. The legal codes Ofcom set out last month are the single biggest change to online safety for a generation.
In 2023, the Lords Digital Committee found that 1.7 million households were without internet. With the forthcoming switchover to internet protocol television, would the Minister outline how they're working to ensure that no one is left behind by that switchover?
I'm very grateful for a question. It's incredibly important. Broadcast TV is legally protected until 2034. This government is committed to ensuring audiences can access television in a way that suits them. Too many people are excluded from digital activity through lacking the basic skills. In the not-too-distant future, I'll be launching the Digital Inclusion Plan. I know that she takes cross-party working very seriously. I hope she'll meet with me so I can brief her on that work and involve her ideas as we develop it.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I refer the House to my register of interest. Globally, billions of pounds of investment are flowing into companies creating new technologies to power data centres. Communities across the UK should be sharing this opportunity of well-paid skilled jobs which this investment offers. In Derby, Rolls-Royce are world leaders in the development of small modular reactors. I love Derby. Does the Secretary of State agree with me that they show British innovation at its strongest and would be a dynamic partner for any technology company wishing to invest in the future?
I'm grateful for his question. I do agree, of course, and of course the other side seem to as well. I agree that technological innovation will be the key to move to net zero, and the UK will be at the forefront of that, and SMRs are particularly exciting. I've met with Rolls-Royce. They have a great advocate in the honourable member. I look forward to hearing more from him and seeing how we can support this exciting technology into the future.
Blakeston.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. What steps is the government taking to support pioneering British companies like Cranfield Aerospace Solutions in mid-Bedfordshire in their pursuit of hydrogen-powered flight? And how will the industrial strategy ensure the UK remains a global leader in sustainable aviation technology?
Thank you. He raises a very important point, one that this government is committed to. That's why we increased R&D spending to the highest of any government in this country, and it will have a direct impact on the issues that he raises.
Before we give Prime Minister's questions, I'm delighted to welcome in the gallery the Speaker of the Lok Sabha of India. Right, let us move to questions to the Prime Minister. Neil Coyle.
Number 1, please, Mr. Speaker.
Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I wish all members of this House a Happy New Year. Mr. Speaker, our thoughts, of course, are with those affected by the recent flooding. And we thank the responders who are working hard to keep communities safe. Mr. Speaker, this week we published our elective reform plan to rebuild our NHS and end the Tory backlog. We will deliver where the previous government failed, empowering patients, boosting productivity, more care in the community and incentivising reform. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others, in addition to my duties in this House. I shall have further such meetings later today.
On behalf of everyone in Southwark, and I hope the whole House, can I offer the Prime Minister condolences on the loss of his brother over Christmas and wish everyone a Happy New Year. Last July, the public overwhelmingly backed Labour's manifesto commitment to halving violence against women and girls. Can the Prime Minister set out how today's vote on the Children's Wellbeing Bill is a crucial step to delivering that promise, to protecting children, and without the delay of an unnecessary further lengthy inquiry?
Can I thank him for his remarks about my brother and the other colleagues who've sent me remarks. Mr. Speaker, he raises a very important issue. Violence against women and girls, abuse, child sexual exploitation are sickening. Many victims have been let down for a very long time by warped ideas about community relations and the protection of institutions. Mr. Speaker, he raises the question of inquiries. There have been a number of inquiries, both national and local, including one covering Oldham, and reasonable people can agree or disagree on whether a further inquiry is necessary. This morning I met some of the victims and survivors of this scandal, and they were clear with me that they want action now, not the delay of a further inquiry. The J inquiry, the last national inquiry, was 7 years, which would take us with a further inquiry to 2031. I think action is what's required. But whatever your view, whatever anyone's view on whether a further inquiry is needed, what I find shocking is that anyone in this House would vote down the Children's Wellbeing Bill this afternoon, which is vital protections for the most vulnerable in our society. And I urge the Leader of the Opposition to withdraw her wrecking amendment.
Leader of the Opposition, can we bear
Mr. Speaker, the whole House has heard that the Prime Minister lost his brother during the Christmas period. So can I offer him, on behalf of my party, our sincerest condolences? The new year has started with a focus on the decades-long rape gang scandal. Across the country, thousands of girls were tortured and sexually abused at the hands of men who treated them as things to be used and disposed of, destroying many lives forever. The Prime Minister has mentioned previous inquiries. He is right. There has been an inquiry into child sexual abuse, but it wasn't about the rape gang scandal. In its 468 pages, it mentioned Rotherham just once. Is the Prime Minister confident that we know the full extent of rape gang activity?
Prime Minister.
Can I first thank her for her condolences, and can I thank her for reaching out over the Christmas period when I lost my brother? I really did appreciate that, and I appreciate it today. Mr. Speaker, on the question of a further inquiry, there have been a number of inquiries, some of them localised, including the Mayor of Manchester's inquiry recently, and of course a national inquiry Professor Jay carried out, took 7 years, had 20 recommendations, none of which actually were implemented by the party opposite when they were in government. Now, this is a really serious issue, and we must focus, obviously, on the victims and survivors. There's no fixed view on the victims and survivors about a further national inquiry. There are mixed views. But there is a view, and I share this view, that what is needed now is action on what we already know. We already know, myself from personal knowledge when I was Chief Prosecutor, that warped ideas, myths and stereotypes about victims were at the heart of this. We've known that for a decade. The Jay report called for mandatory reporting. I called for it 11 years ago. What we need now is action. What can't be tolerated is the idea that this afternoon members opposite will vote down a bill which protects children, include Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, let me just. One of the provisions in the bill is to protect children vulnerable today who are out of school, to prevent abusers ever taking those children out of school. I implore members opposite to defy the misleading leadership of the Leader of the Opposition and vote for a really important bill.
Mr. Speaker, I'm shocked that the Prime Minister would say that actions were not taken. He knows full well that we accepted 18. He knows full well that we accepted 18 of the 20 recommendations in the Jay inquiry and went further launching a gangs task force that found 550 more perpetrators. That shows that there is still work to be done. In Rotherham alone, there have been over 1,400 victims. Across Oldham, Bradford, Bristol, Rochdale, and dozens more towns, there have been thousands more victims, but no one has joined the dots. No one has the total picture, and it is almost certainly still going on. One victim from Telford, and I know he says that victims have different views. We have different views across this House. But one victim from Telford says she wants a national inquiry because it will hold people accountable in a way that previous inquiries have not. It is very possible to have actions, take on more, and still have a national inquiry. So why won't he listen to victims and launch a national inquiry which would have the power to summon witnesses and make them give evidence under oath?
Mr. Speaker, she says they accepted the recommendations. They didn't act on them. Exactly. One of the central recommendations was mandatory reporting, and it still hasn't been enacted. I called for this 11 years ago. They've been tweeting and talking. We've been acting. Well, Mr. Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition has been an MP, I think, for 8 years. Her party have been in government for 7.5 of those 8 years. She was the Children's Minister. She was the Women's and Equalities Minister. I can't recall her once raising this issue in the House, once calling for a national inquiry. It's only in recent days she's jumped on the bandwagon. Now, Mr. Speaker, in fairness, if I'm wrong about that, and she has raised it, then I invite her to say that now, and I will happily withdraw the remark that she hasn't raised it in this House in the 8 years that she's been here until today.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister is being very specific because I have raised this issue. I've raised it in speeches. I've raised it publicly. He knows that as a minister, I would not have been speaking on this specific issue. I was not a Home Office minister. But Mr. Speaker, I will remind him about other victims who came to me who I did help. The victims of the Tavistock scandal who came to me as a minister. I didn't send them away like his safeguarding minister. I made sure, as his Labour Party were calling me transphobic, that we launched the CAS review, which even his health secretary has accepted. So we do right by victims, Mr. Speaker. The reason why a national inquiry is important is because this issue is systemic. It has been involving local and national officials, the police, prosecutors and politicians. He talks about some of the local inquiries, but these interlinked issues cannot be covered by local inquiries alone. In fact, the leaders of the Manchester inquiry resigned because they couldn't get evidence, they couldn't summon witnesses, and not a single person in a position of authority has been held to account. The Prime Minister called for 9 inquiries in the last Parliament. Does he not see that by resisting this one, people will start to worry about a cover-up?
Mr. Speaker, this is an important issue, and we have to focus on the victims and survivors, and it isn't helpful. This sort of lies and misinformation and slinging of mud doesn't help them one bit. Mr. Speaker, she raised a question of a victim with me, and quite right to, and I accept that victims and survivors are in different places on this. Those that I've spoken to are worried about the delay of a further inquiry. The last inquiry took 7 years. That would take us to 2031. Now, these inquiries, amongst the issues that's been raised with me, and if she's been speaking to victims, they'll have raised this with her, is that it's very hard for victims and survivors to come forward to explain what's happened to them. They do not want to be rushed through this process, which is why the last one took 7 years. It's not sensible to suggest that this can be done in a hurry, on the cheap and comprehensively. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, that would take us to, let's say, 2030, 2031. The victims that I've spoken to want action today. I agree with them on that. But what I don't understand, I genuinely don't understand, is why anybody today would vote against the Children Wellbeing Bill, which will protect children who are vulnerable today. kill the bill. It will stop those provisions for children exposed at risk today. I implore them, vote for the bill. Don't wreck this in this misguided way.
Mr. Speaker, it is very possible to have shorter inquiries, especially if they are covering areas that have not been looked at yet. We don't need to repeat the work that has already been done. Let's look at new areas. Former Labour MP Anne Pryor said that there were councillors and MPs all over the country who knew what was going on but were terrified of being labelled racist. A national inquiry would ask if there was a racial or cultural motivation to some of these crimes where white girls were seen, as Jack Straw said, as easy meat. The member for Rotherham was sacked from Labour's front bench for speaking out about rape gangs. Does the Prime Minister now recognise that sacking people for telling the truth creates a chilling effect that means victims aren't listened to?
Well, I'm very happy to call out anybody who hasn't acted properly in these cases. I've done it many, many times before, and it doesn't matter to me which political party they're in. I'll call them out and I will condemn them. Mr. Speaker, when I was Chief Prosecutor, I took measures to confront this head-on. The first of the mass prosecutions for an Asian gang was in Rochdale. My team came to see me. It put a number of Asian men in the dock. They wanted the green light for the first of these cases to take place. I gave that green light, but on one condition, because it came to my attention that one of the men that was going into the dock had previously been arrested but not charged. And I said, you can bring the first of these mass prosecutions, but only if you look back at the file where we weren't charged and tell me what went wrong with a report so that I can start to put it right. And that's what started the reforms I brought about. So that's the approach I took in practice, whilst others were tweeting and talking. It's the approach I would take now in any case where there's wrongdoing here. But what we've got to do now, Professor Jay has said this, we have had a number of strong findings. There are 20 on the table from Professor Jay. We've got to get on with action. Don't block it this afternoon.
Mr. Speaker, we need to focus on what this is really about. This is not about the Prime Minister's work in the CPS. And I would say very respectfully to the Prime Minister, it's not about you, it is about the victims. Be a leader, not a lawyer. We know that people were scared to tell the truth because they thought they would be called racist. If we want to stop this from ever happening again, we cannot be afraid. The Labour Party has adopted the APPG definition of Islamophobia. That same APPG report said talking about sex groomers was an example of Islamophobia. This is exactly why people are scared to tell the truth. And the lack of clarity means that innocent British Muslims are smeared by association. That is not fair, and only a national inquiry can solve this. So will the Prime Minister look again at the Labour Party's adoption of the definition of Islamophobia, its chilling effect, and rule out introducing it in government?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I will call out any aspect that has prevented anybody coming forward or any case going forward when it comes to violence against women and girls, child abuse or child sexual exploitation, as I have been doing now for the best part of 15 years. But, yes, some people will say there should be a further inquiry. But that does... I accept that, but that means all the victims and survivors who are going to give evidence need to be in a position to do so. Not all of them are. I've been speaking to them. There are some that do think they are. It will take time. All of the institutions will have to give evidence. That will take time. This will delay things till 2031 also. But Mr. Speaker, we already know what the major flaws are. And my argument is we should get on with that action. And that's why we're bringing forward the bill this afternoon.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has effectively told us that he's not able to do two things at the same time. This issue of a delay is a weak excuse, and I would say to him that by refusing this inquiry, He is enabling those people who wish to smear all British Muslims based on the actions of a small minority. He is talking about distraction tactics. Let us have the truth. The Prime Minister cannot tell the House the full scale of the scandal. He doesn't want questions asked of Labour politicians who may be complicit. He won't listen to the victims. He won't listen to the victims who are calling for a national inquiry. He is making this all about a bill this afternoon. Later today, he will tell Labour MPs, including in Telford, Rochdale, Bristol, Derby, Aylesbury, Oldham, Bradford, Peterborough, Coventry, Middlesbrough, Newcastle, Ramsgate, to tell all of these people to vote against a national inquiry into the gangs which have systematically gang-raped children in their constituencies. This is one of the worst scandals in British history, Mr. Speaker.
Sorry? This is a very, very important issue that does matter to the country. It matters to all our constituents. I want to make sure they can hear what's being said by the Leader of the Opposition and the Prime Minister of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, this is one of the worst scandals in recent British history. But how are they going to explain to their constituents that obeying his whip is more important than doing the right thing?
She's right to say it's one of the worst scandals. It's terrible. That's why I acted on it. If her recently acquired view that it's a scandal, having spent a lot of time on social media over Christmas, not once in 8 years did she stand here and say what she's just said. Not once in 8 years. They didn't act on the recommendations. They want a national inquiry. We had a national inquiry, the J inquiry, the J report. 20 recommendations, not a single one implemented. Not a single one implemented. And she said you can do two things at once. You can't kill the bill this afternoon, wreck that bill, and protect children. There was Mr. Speaker, there was a dreadful case of Sarah Sharif that everybody will remember. This was the girl taken out of school and abused by an abuser. The bill this afternoon fixes that gap. And I know, I'm looking across, I know there are honourable members on the benches opposite who know very well that what's in this bill is necessary, that it's the right thing to do, and that would want to vote for this bill. I urge them to think twice about following this short-sighted, misguided, bandwagon-jumping approach of the non-leadership of the Leader of the Opposition. I urge them to.
Speaker. My constituent, Anne-Marie, and countless other armed forces families across Aldershot and Farnborough are living in shabby military accommodation that simply isn't good enough after 14 years of Conservative neglect. So can I welcome the Ministry of Defence plan to buy back thousands of homes in my constituency? And will the Prime Minister set out how sorting out this bad deal left behind by a past Tory government will make life better for Anne-Marie and others like her living in the home of the British Army?
Prime Minister.
Can I thank her for her question? And we all owe extraordinary debt of thanks to those who serve. Mr. Speaker, by reacquiring over 36,000 service family homes, including 1,700 in my honourable friend's constituency, we can rapidly transform substandard accommodation. The deal that we've done also saves the taxpayer around £230 million per year in rent, and of course it follows the largest pay rise for the armed forces in over 20 years. There is of course still work to do, but this is a major step forward.
We now come to the Leader of the Liberal Democrats, Red Davey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Happy New Year to you. And can I join others by offering my personal condolences to the Prime Minister on the loss of his brother? And can I take this opportunity to express my sadness at the passing of a much-loved member of the Liberal Democrat family, Baroness Jenny Randerson. Mr. Speaker, fixing the care crisis is urgent. For the millions of people, elderly and disabled, who are not getting the care they need, for the millions of family carers who are making huge sacrifices to fill the gap, for the NHS, where over 12,000 people are stuck in hospital beds because they can't get out of hospital because the care is not there for them. The Prime Minister is right to say we need a cross-party approach today, but as Sir Andrew Dillot has said today, that needn't take 3 years. So will the Prime Minister please speed up this work so 2025 is the year we finally rise to the challenge of fixing care?
Prime Minister.
I thank him for raising this important issue and thank him for his condolences. Yes, it is right we need to get this right. I'm on a cross-party consensus on this and invite him to work with us on this, as I know he will. But it is important, and he's right to say we need some action now as well. And that is why it's important I point out the immediate action that we've taken, the £3.7 billion of additional funding in the budget for social care, another £86 million to allow 7,800 more disabled and elderly people to live more independent lives, and of course the increased carers allowance. And the way in which we've set this up is in stages so that we can act and improve as we go along, but making sure that we've got consensus for the bigger changes that may be proposed in the review. And I do invite him and members across the House to work with us on this so that we can get this right and make sure that what we put in place endures beyond just a few years. Thank you.
Red David.
Mr. Speaker, I'm afraid if the government doesn't bring in these long-term social care reforms this year, their NHS reforms, this Parliament will fail. So I hope he will revisit the timetable. But moving on, Mr. Speaker, while the honourable member for Clacton may miss out on his big allowance from Elon Musk, the spectre of the richest man in the world trying to buy a British political party should give us all pause for thought. And after years of the Conservatives taking millions in pounds of Russian money, will the Prime Minister now work with us to bring in long overdue reforms of party funding so that power in this country lies with the voters and not wealthy overseas oligarchs?
I think we all had a smile on Sunday when the honourable member said how cool it was to have the support of Musk, only for Musk to say he should be removed. Just a few hours later, that's the rough and tough of politics. And of course, we're looking at the question of funding more generally.
Joseph.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the efforts this Labour government has made to reset our relationship with the European Union and to seek to remove unnecessary trade barriers. The trading links between the UK and mainland Europe are of particular importance to my constituency of Ashford. So would the Prime Minister support my efforts and those of other Kent colleagues to restore international train service to Ashford International Station that will help economic growth in my constituency, Kent and wider South East?
Prime Minister.
Well, I thank my honourable friend for raising this question. Businesses in his constituents have been badly let down by the deal of the last government, and we, of course, are resetting and strengthening that relationship on the economy, on energy, on security to deliver the growth that we need. I know this is an issue of considerable frustration to his constituents. The decision in question, Mr. Speaker, is ultimately for Eurostar, but we are keen to see international services reinstated to Ashford as soon as possible, and I would be happy for the Rail Minister to update him on the latest discussions.
Stephen Flynn.
Mr. Speaker, can I begin by doing something unusual, which is to commend the Prime Minister on his earlier answers to the Leader of the Opposition and, of course, to pass on my party's condolences to him for the loss of his brother. Outside of this place, temperatures continue to plummet, energy bills continue to rise, and the winter fuel allowance has been unacceptably taken away from so many vulnerable pensioners. Now, the Prime Minister intimated prior to Christmas that he had no regrets about any of the decisions that he has taken in office. Does he understand that the public do?
Prime Minister.
I thank him for his condolences. We took some tough decisions. They led to a budget which delivered the largest settlement since devolution began to Scotland. If he thinks we should now reverse that, then he should say so. What it's done is it's given the money, so now the SNP have the money, they have the power, and no more excuses for the non-delivery that we see in Scotland. If he wants me to reverse that, he should say so.
Sam Rushworth.
Mr. Speaker. Feeling safe in your own community is among the most basic of human needs, but after 14 years of Tory cuts to Durham's frontline police and breaking the criminal justice system, too many of my constituents are victims of violence, theft and antisocial behaviour, and these crimes too often go unpunished. Now, I know the Prime Minister's had a lifelong commitment to protecting victims, so what assurances can the Prime Minister give my constituents that our new government will be tough on crime and on the causes of crime?
Mr. Speaker, he's right to raise this important issue, and I have to say, when he said there were cuts to polices and somebody said boring, I think that somebody opposite just said boring. That tells you everything you need to know about the last 14 years. He's right. We need to crack down on those committing vile acts in our communities, and that's why our plan for change puts 13,000 extra police and PCSO officers into neighbourhood policing, 3.5% real terms increase, and of course tough new respect orders. Where they lost control, we'll take back control and deliver safe and secure communities.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituent Dipak first opened the doors to his pharmacy in 1991, and he's been serving the Chelmsford community ever since, greeting many of his patients by name. But Dipak's business is struggling. His NHS contract no longer covers the cost of the drugs he has to dispense. For example, he's sometimes been forced to pay over 100 times more for a particular mental health drug than his contract provides. Dipak is dipping into his life savings to keep his pharmacy afloat, and I'm sure that many other pharmacists across the country are doing the same. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that no pharmacist should be forced to use their own money to keep their pharmacy viable?
Prime Minister.
Can I thank her for raising this really important and challenging case? Community pharmacists like Dipak play a vital role in our health service. And as she knows, the Department of Health and Social Care sets drug tariff prices and regularly assesses what pharmacies are reimbursed to ensure overall they're paid fairly. If she would prepare to share the details further with me, I will look and have a review by the team of the particular case that she's raised with me. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last year, I was honoured to accept an invitation from the European Jewish Association to go to Krakow and discuss the role of Holocaust education in tackling the rising tide of anti-Semitism across Europe. We also visited Auschwitz and Auschwitz-Birkenau, where we laid wreaths and paid tributes to the many victims of the Holocaust. Given that this month marks the 80th anniversary of the liberation of those evil places, will the Prime Minister set out what this government is doing on Holocaust education to ensure that never again means never again?
Well, I thank him for raising this. Anti-Semitism is completely abhorrent and has no place whatsoever in our society. Mr. Speaker, I recently met with Jewish community leaders in Downing Street to discuss what further we can do to combat anti-Semitism, and that includes allocating £54 million for the Community Security Trust to continue their vital work, committing to building a new Holocaust Memorial and Learning Centre, and providing at least £2.2 million to continue the funding Lessons from Auschwitz. And I look forward to working with others on those important proposals.
Victoria Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Businesses like Hicks in Harpenden, charities like the Hospice of St Francis in Berkhamsted, health and social care providers like the Elms Medical Practice in Harpenden, a GP, are amongst those up and down this country who are warning the government about the negative impact of the proposed changes to national insurance contributions. When will the Prime Minister heed those warnings and, at the very least, look at exemptions for health and social care providers like they have for the NHS?
Prime Minister.
Thank you for raising this. Look, we had to deliver a budget to wipe the slate clean and to deliver the stable basis for our economy and at the same time repair our public services. That's why we invested £25.6 billion over 2 years in the NHS, including additional funding for GPs and for hospices. And we are taking measures to ensure that funding is there to support our vital services.
Mr. Speaker, every week I visit constituents in my Hackney South and Shoreditch constituency living in the most appalling, overcrowded social housing, some with triple bunk beds in the bedroom and the parents on a sofa bed in the living room. The nearest available property to buy would be £500,000, and it's out of the reach for these hard-working families. I really welcome our government's commitment to 1.5 million new homes. Will the Prime Minister agree that we need clear targets for the number of social housing units so that families in Hackney can live in dignity?
Prime Minister.
I'm grateful to her for raising this, and she describes an appalling situation when it comes to housing, and one will be familiar to a number of MPs on both sides of the House. And that's why we will deliver the 1.5 million homes that we desperately need across the country. She's right, and the budget announced 500 million into the Affordable Homes programme, which is hugely important, 100 million of that going to the Greater London Authority. And we will also, Mr Speaker, reform the right to buy to deliver a fairer, better value, a more sustainable scheme where long-standing tenants can buy their own home.
Andrew George.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. In Cornwall, in the last 10 years, over £500 million has been handed to holiday homeowners through various tax loopholes, etc., whilst local families are being evicted from their homes to make way for yet more holiday homes as the housing crisis deepens and worsens. The 6 MPs in Cornwall are determined to reverse this situation and to address these issues before the end of this Parliament. Will the Prime Minister agree to meet us so we get the full backing of government and deliver first rather than second homes for the good of Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly?
Prime Minister.
I thank you for raising this. We are committed to building those 1.5 million homes, and that includes 4,500 new homes every year in Cornwall. But I do recognise the point he makes, which is that excessive concentrations of short-term lets and second homes in places like Cornwall can impact the availability and affordability of homes. That's why we'll enable councils to charge a premium on the council tax bills of second homes, abolish the furnished homes let regime and introduce a registration scheme for short-term lets. But I am happy to make sure that he and his Cornish colleagues do get the meeting they want with the Housing Minister to discuss that further.
Joyce Fenton-Glenn.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. This government is committed to using the criminal justice system to tackle violence against women and girls. But when an abuser can use a child custody battle to continue their abuse, as happened in the case of one of my constituents, it's clear that we need to raise the issue in the civil courts too. Will the Prime Minister please look at ending the absurd assumption that a domestic abuser's involvement in a child's life is advantageous to their welfare?
Prime Minister.
Yeah, absolutely, and he's right, Mr Speaker. Family courts must never be a tool that domestic abusers can use to continue their appalling abuse, and that's why we're expanding the number of new Pathfinder courts to provide dedicated support to survivors and protect the welfare of children. We are reviewing the presumption of parental involvement and we'll set out our position in due course. And I'll make sure that he meets the relevant minister to discuss this further.
Christine Jardine.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and can I associate myself with the remarks of the Liberal Democrat leader and others today. Happy New Year to everyone, but 2025 is already proving a challenge for many of my constituents. Pensioners, families, small businesses, the hospitality industry, GPs, social care, as others have said. They know that the SNP has failed to deliver for Scotland. They hear when the Prime Minister says that the Conservatives left the economy in a mess, and they know that governments make difficult decisions. But what they are asking me is, when is this government going to do something positive for them to overcome the negative impacts they're facing from the budget?
Prime Minister.
Thank you very much. Can I just address something I should have addressed to our leader, which is to express our condolences about Jenny Randerson. I apologise, I overlooked that earlier on. She raises the point about the failure of the SNP and the legacy of the Tories, and I'm proud that this Labour government delivered the largest budget settlement for Scotland since devolution, and that means, Mr Speaker, in answer to a question, 100,000 workers in Scotland benefit from the increases from the national minimum and living wage each year. An estimated 3.2 million people in Scotland will benefit from the extension of the 5p cut in fuel duty. And it comes, of course, on top of the 125 million to set up Great British Energy in Aberdeen. And it reinforces the point. They've got the powers, but a terrible record. They left a terrible legacy. We're getting on for delivering for Scotland.
Joyce Newbley.
Last year, this Labour government delivered justice for members of the Mine Workers Pension Scheme. 45,000 members of the similar British Coal Staff Superannuation Scheme are keen to see their £2.3 billion investment reserve returned to them, which could boost coalfield communities like mine in Cannock Chase. Will the Prime Minister meet with retired miners, trustees and coalfield MPs to discuss what could be done for BCSS members up and down the country?
Prime Minister.
Well, thank you for raising this issue. I was pleased, Mr Speaker, that the first increased payments to Mine Workers Scheme members were made at the end of November. I do understand the strong feeling on the British Coal Staff Superannuation Scheme, which is why the Minister for Industry met the trustees last year, and we will be working with the coal staff trustees to consider their proposals once the new Mine Workers Pension Scheme arrangements have been agreed.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, first of all, we had a Chancellor who embellished her CV, then we had a Transport Secretary with a fraud conviction, and now we've got an anti-corruption minister who is being investigated for corruption. Now, I know the Prime Minister likes living in free accommodation, but does he really think it's appropriate that his minister is being given free housing by the political allies of some very dubious foreign regimes?
Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, the City Minister has acted appropriately by referring herself to the independent adviser. We brought in our new ministerial code to allow ministers to ask to establish the facts, and I'm not going to give a running commentary on that important exercise.
Tonia Antoniazzi.
Of the last couple of days, I wrote to the England and Wales Cricket Board regarding the upcoming game in the Championship Trophy against Afghanistan on the 26th of February. I have met with the ECB and we are calling for the game to be boycotted. I thank everybody for the support that I've had across this House and also at the other place. I also would like to thank very much the Prime Minister for his intervention with the International Cricket Council yesterday. But would he please agree to meet and talk to his counterparts in South Africa and Australia that they boycott the Games as well?
Mr Speaker, there's been an appalling erosion of the rights of women and girls in Afghanistan. And we all should condemn that suppression of freedoms in the strongest terms. And that's why we provided additional aid, at least 50% of which we're going to women and girls. DCMS are in touch with the international counterparts on this issue. I welcome the England and Wales Cricket Board making strong representations to the International Cricket Council on Afghanistan's women's cricket team.
Final question, Sir Roger Gale.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, setting aside the matter of grooming gangs, the opposition amendment on the order paper today sets out very clearly why the bill that we shall be debating is so very deeply flawed. And if it is to become an Act of Parliament, it will have to be completely rewritten in committee. But, Mr Speaker, the Prime Minister from that dispatch box has made much of his service as the public prosecutor. So could he tell the House in that capacity why during his time he declined to instigate a prosecution for rape and sexual abuse against Mohammed Fayed?
Prime Minister.
That case never crossed my desk.
Right. That completes Prime Minister's question.
At least 50% of which we're going to women and girls. DCMS are in touch with the international counterparts on this issue. I welcome the England and Wales Cricket Board making strong representations to the International Cricket Council on Afghanistan's women's cricket team.
Final question, Sir Roger Gale.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, setting aside the matter of grooming gangs, the opposition amendment on the order paper today sets out very clearly why the bill that we shall be debating is so very deeply flawed. And if it is to become an Act of Parliament, it will have to be completely rewritten in committee. But, Mr Speaker, the Prime Minister from that dispatch box has made much of his service as the public prosecutor. So could he tell the House in that capacity why during his time he declined to instigate a prosecution for rape and sexual abuse against Mohammed Fayed?
Prime Minister.
That case never crossed my desk.
Right. That completes Prime Minister's question.